Picture a landscape of endless, sun-baked earth, where the air shimmers with heat and the horizon stretches into a dry, unforgiving emptiness. In the very heart of this apparent wasteland, a miracle rises from the sand. A city carved from cliffs of rose-red stone, its temples and tombs standing as a defiant declaration against the elements. It seems impossible, a vision that defies logic. How could a bustling metropolis, a center of trade, culture, and thousands of lives, ever flourish here? This is the profound mystery we are about to unravel. We are journeying into the world of the desert cities that should not exist, places where human ingenuity performed what can only be described as alchemy, transforming the greatest threats to survival into the very foundations of civilization. For centuries, these cities have captured our imagination, not just as ruins of a forgotten past, but as living proof of an extraordinary partnership between people and planet. The inhabitants of these arid realms did not see the relentless sun, the sculpting wind, or the enduring stone as enemies to be conquered. Instead, they saw them as partners, as tools waiting to be understood and harnessed. They learned to read the subtle language of the desert, to listen to the whispers of the wind and interpret the secrets held within the rock. Their survival was not a story of brute force, but one of brilliant adaptation, a deep and intimate dialogue with a hostile world that resulted in some of the most breathtaking architectural and engineering feats in human history. In this video, we will walk through the narrow, shaded streets of these impossible settlements. We will descend into cool, subterranean homes and look up at ingenious towers designed to catch the breeze. We will uncover the hidden waterways that flowed beneath the sand, the lifelines that turned dust into gardens. This is more than an archaeological tour. It is a lesson in resilience, a masterclass in sustainability written in stone and earth by our ancestors. The secrets they uncovered about living in balance with extreme environments hold profound relevance for our world today. So, join us as we unlock the mysteries of how wind, stone, and sun were not just endured, but were masterfully harnessed to create oases of life where none should rightly be. The very idea seems to defy logic. A thriving, densely populated urban center, pulsing with commerce and culture, set against a backdrop of seemingly infinite sand and rock. This is the central paradox of the desert city. From a distance, it appears as a mirage, a trick of the light and the mind. But as you draw closer, the illusion solidifies into stunning reality. These were not mere outposts or desperate camps. They were monumental achievements of civilization, places like Petra in Jordan, Palmyra in Syria, and countless others that rose to become powerful hubs of trade and innovation. Their prosperity in the face of such profound scarcity is what makes them so captivating and, for historians, so seemingly impossible. To understand this paradox, we first need to define what we mean by an impossible city. It's not that their existence breaks the laws of physics, but that they succeeded in conditions that conventional wisdom would deem unlivable. The first and most obvious challenge was water, or rather, the staggering lack of it. In these regions, annual rainfall could be less than a few inches, far too little to support agriculture or sustain a large population through conventional means like rivers or lakes. There were no mighty Niles or Tigris-Euphrates systems here. The very ground was a testament to aridity, a landscape that actively repelled life rather than nurturing it. Then there was the climate itself, a brutal cycle of extremes. Days could see temperatures soar to blistering heights, baking the earth and everything on it, while nights could plunge into a deep, penetrating cold. Add to this the relentless, abrasive winds that could strip paint from wood and carve stone over centuries, and the constant, fine dust that infiltrated every crack and crevice. These cities were engaged in a perpetual, multi-front battle against the elements, a battle they were not supposed to win. Yet they did not just win, they thrived. They turned these apparent weaknesses into incredible strengths. The scarcity of water forced them to develop conservation techniques so advanced that we are still learning from them today. The harsh sun became a tool for heating and a catalyst for cooling strategies that required no electricity. The wind was transformed from a nuisance into a natural ventilation system. The very stone that offered little in the way of soil for farming became the perfect building material for climate-resilient structures. The impossibility of these cities, therefore, lies in this incredible inversion of circumstance. They did not simply endure their environment, they performed a kind of alchemy upon it, transmuting threats into resources. This foundational shift in perspective, from seeing the desert as a foe to be fought to seeing it as a partner to be understood, was the first and most crucial innovation. It's this mindset that allowed them to peel back the harsh outer layer of the desert and discover the hidden opportunities within, setting the stage for their mastery of the first and most dominant element they faced every single day. That relentless tyrant, the sun, was the first and most constant challenge every desert dweller faced. Its presence was inescapable, a force that could bake the very ground into ceramic and make the air itself feel like a furnace. But where we might see only an adversary, the ancient builders of these cities saw a powerful, predictable, and untapped resource. Their first great innovation was a profound shift in perspective. They stopped trying to block out the sun and started learning how to dance with it. This was the birth of passive solar design, a concept we often think of as modern, but one that was being perfected millennia ago. The core principle was elegant in its simplicity, used the building itself as a thermal battery. They constructed homes and public buildings with incredibly thick walls made from mud brick or locally quarried stone. These materials have what is known as high thermal mass. Think of a massive stone sitting in the sun all day. It absorbs that solar energy slowly, never getting as hot as, say, a thin piece of metal would. Then, as the desert night brings a deep chill, that stored heat within the stone begins to radiate back out, warming the interior space. It was a natural, self-regulating system. The walls would soak up the heat all day, preventing the indoors from becoming an oven, and then gently release that captured warmth throughout the cold night, creating a remarkably stable and comfortable living environment. This was climate control without any moving parts, without any fuel, powered solely by the daily cycle of the sun itself. The intelligence didn't stop with the walls. The very orientation of the buildings was a calculated science. Streets were laid out in narrow, labyrinthine patterns, not by accident but by design. This created deep pools of shade for most of the day, dramatically lowering the ambient temperature in the public spaces where people lived and worked. Meanwhile, the buildings themselves were positioned with a keen understanding of solar paths. Windows and openings were often smaller and strategically placed on the north-facing sides to capture softer, indirect light, while the larger, blank walls faced the relentless southern sun, acting as a shield. In some cultures, they developed intricate screened windows like the mashrabiyah in the Middle East, which were beautiful wooden lattices. Their function, however, was supremely practical. They broke up the harsh, direct sunlight into a soft, diffused glow, reducing glare and heat gain while still allowing for air to circulate freely. This was architecture as a precise instrument, finely tuned to the angles of the sun across the seasons. Nowhere is this mastery more vividly displayed than in the ancient city of Yazd in Iran, often called the City of Windcatchers. Here, the inhabitants developed an architectural marvel that took solar principles to their zenith, the Badger or Wind Tower. These tall, chimney-like structures rose above the city's skyline, but they were far more than decoration. They were sophisticated climate machines. The top of a Badger is open on multiple sides, designed to catch even the faintest breeze from any direction. This breeze was then funneled down the tall shaft, which often had a small opening facing the prevailing wind to create a powerful suction effect. As the air descended, it was channeled directly into the heart of the building below. But the true genius often lay beneath the house. Many of these homes were built with a subterranean level, or even a central courtyard with a small pool of water. The air, after being captured high above the hot ground, would flow down into these cool, shaded spaces. If it passed over that pool, it would be cooled even further by evaporation before circulating through the living quarters. Meanwhile, the hot, stale air inside the building, being lighter, would naturally rise and be expelled through other openings, creating a continuous, self-powering cycle of ventilation and cooling. This system required no electricity, only a deep understanding of physics of convection, evaporation, and solar heating. It was a way of using the sun's own energy to power a system that counteracted its most extreme effects, a perfect example of turning a foe into a foundational tool for survival. If the sun was the constant, predictable force they learned to dance with, then the wind was its wild and unpredictable partner, a force that could shift from a gentle caress to a sand-blasting gale in moments. Yet the architects of these desert cities perceived something profound within this chaos, a pattern, a rhythm they could not only anticipate but actively orchestrate. They became true architects of airflow, treating the wind not as an enemy to be barricaded out, but as a powerful, invisible river to be channeled and directed for their benefit. This mastery transformed their urban landscapes into sophisticated instruments of climate control. The most iconic of these inventions is undoubtedly the Badger or Windcatcher, a structure so elegant in its function it rivals modern mechanical systems. Imagine a tall, slender tower rising above a flat-roofed cityscape, its top open on several sides. It isn't just a chimney, it's a selective air intake. The side facing the prevailing wind captures the coolest, cleanest air available, high above the dust-choked streets. This captured breeze is then funneled down the long, shaded shaft of the tower. As it descends, something fascinating happens. The air, now moving into the lower pressure area of the building's interior, often passes over a pool of water or a moist clay surface, triggering evaporation. This process, known as evaporative cooling, actively lowers the air's temperature, sometimes by a significant margin, before it spills silently into the living quarters. Meanwhile, the system is self-completing. The influx of this cooler, denser air creates pressure that pushes the warm, stale air inside the building upwards and out through another opening or a different side of the Badger itself. It's a perfectly balanced, gravity-driven, and energy-free air conditioning system, humming along on the simple principles of physics. This intelligent manipulation of air extended far beyond individual buildings, becoming a defining principle of entire city plans. Urban designers thought of their streets not merely as pathways for people, but as carefully engineered ventilation corridors. They laid out narrow, often winding lanes that were deliberately oriented to align with the direction of seasonal winds. These constricted passages, shaded by the high walls of buildings on either side, would accelerate the wind's flow, creating what is known as a venturi effect. The same principle that causes air to speed up when forced through a narrow opening was harnessed to sweep cool breezes through the urban core, flushing out heat and stagnant air. This was urban-scale air conditioning, a communal solution that benefited every resident, from the wealthiest merchant to the most humble craftsman. It ensured that the entire city could breathe, that fresh air was not a luxury but a fundamental component of the built environment. The challenge, of course, was that the desert wind rarely comes alone. It brings its constant companion, dust and sand. Allowing unfiltered gusts into a home would be a recipe for misery. So, these ancient engineers incorporated brilliant filtration systems directly into their designs. In the breathtaking Siwa oasis of Egypt, for example, the traditional architecture of the Shali fortress and surrounding structures showcases this perfectly. Buildings were constructed with specific angles and projections that acted as wind deflectors. Small, strategically placed windows and entranceways were designed not just for security, but to create airlocks that minimized dust infiltration while still permitting ventilation. The very materials used, like the local kershif, a mix of salt and clay, had natural properties that helped to regulate humidity and bind dust. Every architectural decision was a multi-layered solution, addressing cooling, airflow, and livability simultaneously. What we see emerging from these practices is nothing short of an early form of aerodynamic engineering, a field we typically associate with modern aircraft and high-tech sports cars. These builders were intuitively understanding fluid dynamics, pressure differentials, and thermal convection. They were mapping local wind patterns with an observational precision that took generations to accumulate, knowledge passed down from master builders to apprentices. They knew which breezes brought relief from which direction at different times of the day and year, and they sculpted their entire world to welcome them. By turning this potential nuisance into a life-sustaining resource, they demonstrated a level of environmental integration that we are only now, in our age of energy crises and climate challenges, beginning to fully appreciate and strive to emulate. They proved that the most sustainable technology is often the one that works in harmony with the natural forces already present, asking not how we can overpower the wind, but how we can gracefully invite it inside. And so we arrive at the third and perhaps most tangible element in this ancient symphony of survival, the enduring stone. Picture the monumental effort of carving an entire city, not just from stone, but directly into the living rock itself. This was the reality in places like Petra, where the very cliff faces were transformed into magnificent facades like the treasury. But to view this stone as merely a shelter is to miss its true, multifaceted genius. In the desert, stone was far more than a passive building block. It was an active climate moderator, a vital tool for water management, and a profound cultural canvas. Its use represents the ultimate expression of working with what the land itself provided, a philosophy of resourcefulness that turned the desert's own bones into the foundation of civilization. The first and most immediate benefit of stone was its incredible thermal mass. We've touched on this with mud brick, but stone takes this principle to a monumental scale. The desert experiences extreme diurnal temperature, swings blisteringly hot days followed by shockingly cold nights. A thin tent or a wooden hut would offer little buffer against this dramatic cycle, turning into an oven by day and an icebox by night. But a structure built from massive stone blocks behaves completely differently. Think of a large, smooth river rock left in the sun. It takes hours for the sun's heat to penetrate deep into its core. Throughout the day, the outer surface of a stone wall might be hot, but the inner surface, facing the living space, remains remarkably cool. The stone is actively absorbing the thermal energy, preventing it from entering the interior. Then, as the desert night brings a deep chill, the process reverses. The heat stored within the massive stone slowly, gently radiates inward, warming the rooms against the cold. This creates a natural thermal lag, effectively flattening the extreme temperature curve and providing a stable, comfortable environment that required no mechanical intervention. It was the original smart wall, automatically regulating temperature through its own physical properties. Beyond just sitting as a passive mass, the choice and placement of stone were acts of deliberate climate design. Building directly into rock faces, as the Nabateans did in Petra, meant the earth itself became a giant insulator with a constant, cool temperature that was largely unaffected by the surface extremes. Furthermore, builders were savvy about the specific types of stone they used. They often selected lighter-colored limestone or sandstone that had high albedo, meaning it reflected a significant portion of the sun's radiant energy rather than absorbing it. This simple choice of material could significantly reduce the heat load on a building compared to a darker stone. The orientation of these stone structures was also critical. By positioning large, blank stone walls against the prevailing direction of the harsh afternoon sun, they created a formidable shield, while strategically placed smaller openings on shaded sides allowed for light and air without the punishing heat gain. The stone, therefore, was not just a material, it was a key component in a comprehensive environmental strategy. But the role of stone extended far beyond temperature control into the most critical domain of desert survival, water. In an environment where liquid life was so scarce, the management of every single drop was paramount, and stone was the perfect tool for the job. The inherent durability and impermeability of certain types of stone made it ideal for constructing the intricate hydrological networks that were the lifeblood of these cities. They carefully carved and fitted stone channels to direct precious rainwater from rooftops and paved courtyards into underground cisterns. They lined vast, communal reservoirs with stone to prevent precious water from seeping back into the thirsty earth. In the case of Petra's famous water conduit system, the Nabateans carved sophisticated channels and pipelines directly into the cliff faces and along the sides of the sick, using gravity and the non-porous nature of the rock to transport water for miles with minimal loss to evaporation or seepage. The stone was the perfect vessel, ensuring that the rare and violent flash floods could be captured, tamed, and stored for the long, dry months ahead. This relationship with stone also provided a crucial layer of security and permanence. The sheer durability of stone structures offered unparalleled protection from the desert's frequent and violent sandstorms. While a fierce wind could shred fabrics and erode mud brick over time, a well-built stone wall stood firm, a bastion against the abrasive, stinging sands. This security fostered a sense of permanence that allowed culture to flourish. And this is where stone transcended its practical roles to become a cultural canvas. The facades of Petra, the tombs of Palmyra, the intricate carvings on countless desert structures, they were not just buildings, they were statements. They were proclamations of power, of wealth, and of artistic achievement. The act of carving a magnificent temple into a mountainside was a way of etching a civilization's identity directly onto the landscape, making a declaration that they were here, they had mastered this place, and they would endure. The stone provided a permanence that allowed art, religion, and civic identity to take root and be remembered for millennia. It was a testament to a deep, symbiotic relationship. The people shaped the stone, and in return, the stone gave them comfort, security, and a legacy that would outlast empires. So, with a profound understanding of how to harness the sun, wind, and stone, you might wonder, where does one even begin to lay the first brick of a desert metropolis? This was not a decision made on a whim or a desperate last stand. Founding a city in such an unforgiving environment was arguably the most critical and deliberate act of all, a high-stakes gamble based on a deep, almost intuitive reading of the landscape. The pioneers who established these urban centers were not just builders, they were master geologists, hydrologists, and strategists, capable of seeing potential where others saw only barren emptiness. They were searching for the subtle, often invisible, signatures of life hidden within the vastness. One of the most powerful magnets for settlement was the presence of a hidden aquifer, a vast underground reservoir of water trapped in porous rock layers. These were not visible to the naked eye, but their presence was betrayed by telltale signs on the surface. The most obvious was a natural spring, like the legendary Efka spring that gave life to Palmyra. This wasn't just a source of water, it was a miracle, a place where the earth itself offered up its secret reserves, but such obvious gifts were rare. More often, settlers looked for more subtle clues. They would identify specific types of vegetation that had deep taproots capable of reaching the water table, certain species of palms or acacia trees acting as natural signposts pointing towards hydration deep below. They observed the lay of the land, seeking out geological depressions known as wadis or playas, which acted as natural bowls to catch and concentrate the region's meager, often violent rainfall. A single thunderstorm might dump a torrent of water that would quickly run off the hard-baked higher ground. But in these low-lying basins, the water would pool and, crucially, have time to slowly percolate down, recharging the groundwater and creating a potential source for wells. The very rock beneath their feet also held vital information. Certain permeable rock formations, like sandstone or limestone, were prized because they could act as natural sponges, absorbing and filtering rainwater. Even more importantly, impermeable layers of rock, like granite or dense clay, could trap that water, creating a confined aquifer, a natural underground storage tank. The settlers understood these geological principles through generations of accumulated observation. They knew that a particular outcrop or a specific fracture in a cliff face might indicate a fault line, a crack in the earth that could channel subsurface water towards the surface. The decision to carve a city directly into a cliff, as with Petra, was not solely for defense or grandeur. It was often because that specific rock formation was ideal for both creating insulated dwellings and for tapping into the hydrological systems that flowed within and beneath it. The stone itself was a map, and these ancient city planners knew how to read it. Yet, survival was not just about water and shelter, it was also about purpose. This is where economics entered the equation with profound force. Many of the greatest desert cities were founded at the confluence of ancient trade routes. Picture a vast, empty map with a few thin, precarious lines crossing the most desolate stretches. These were the caravan routes, the lifeblood of intercontinental commerce, carrying spices, silks, incense, and ideas. Establishing a settlement at a strategic oasis or a mountain pass along these routes was like building a service station on the only highway for thousands of miles. A city like Palmyra did not just happen to have a spring. It had a spring, and it was situated at a critical nexus between the Roman Empire and the Parthian East. This transformed it from a simple survivalist outpost into a thriving, cosmopolitan hub. The wealth generated from taxing and supplying the caravans provided the resources to fund the massive public works, the dams, the Qanats, the grand colonnaded streets, that amplified their ability to survive the harsh environment. The trade routes brought not just goods but also knowledge, exposing the city's engineers to new ideas and technologies from distant lands, creating a feedback loop of innovation and resilience. The location was therefore a multi-variable equation, balancing the absolute necessity of water security with the tremendous opportunity of economic connectivity. It was this combination, a reliable, hidden water source and a position of strategic importance, that turned a calculated risk into the foundation of an empire. The founders of these cities were playing a long game, seeing not just the immediate challenge of survival, but the potential for a legacy that would endure for centuries, all because they possessed the skill to decipher the silent language of the desert. Now let's step into the shadows of the Sick, the magnificent winding canyon that serves as the sole entrance to Petra. This isn't just a path, it's the city's first and most dramatic line of defense against the desert climate. As you walk its narrow, mile-long course with rose-red sandstone cliffs soaring hundreds of feet overhead, you immediately feel a dramatic drop in temperature. The towering walls create a permanent, deep shade, shielding you from the direct hammer blow of the sun, but the genius goes deeper than simple shade. The specific, sinuous shape of the Sick acts as a natural wind tunnel, funneling any slight breeze into a cooling current that flows through the canyon. This was the Nabateans' masterstroke. They didn't have to build a grand, shaded avenue. They found one carved by nature itself and made it the ceremonial gateway to their city. It sets the stage perfectly, preparing the visitor not just spiritually but physically for the marvel to come, all while demonstrating a fundamental principle: use the landscape's own form as your first and most powerful tool for climate control. And then you see it. The Sick narrows, frames a sliver of darkness, and then opens just enough to reveal the breathtaking facade of the treasury, Al-Khosne, glowing in filtered sunlight. It's a moment of pure theatricality, but the building itself is far more than a beautiful sculpture. Carving directly into the sandstone cliff was an act of profound architectural intelligence. The rock itself, several meters thick, becomes a perfect insulator. The interior chambers of the treasury, and indeed all of Petra's rock-cut structures, maintain a remarkably stable temperature. The stone absorbs the daytime heat so slowly that the indoors remain cool, and then it radiates the stored warmth throughout the chilly desert night. This eliminated the need for complex heating or cooling systems. The very earth was their climate control unit. Furthermore, the brilliant, rose-red hue of the sandstone isn't just aesthetically stunning, it has a high albedo, meaning it reflects a significant portion of the sun's radiant energy, further reducing heat absorption compared to a darker rock. Every choice, from the grand gesture of carving into the cliff to the specific material they worked with, was a calculated decision for survival and comfort. Yet the true lifeblood of Petra, the secret that allowed a population of perhaps 20,000 people to thrive in this arid landscape, was hidden from view. The Nabateans were unparalleled hydrological engineers. They understood that in a desert, water is not just a resource, it's a fleeting event, often arriving in violent, unpredictable flash floods. Instead of fearing these torrents, they devised a way to capture, tame, and store them with breathtaking efficiency. They constructed a vast, city-wide network of dams, diversion tunnels, and underground cisterns. When rain fell on the surrounding highlands, it would gather into a powerful flood surge, barreling towards the Sick. But the Nabateans were ready. They built a massive dam at the entrance to divert the floodwaters into a man-made tunnel, channeling the destructive force away from the main entrance and into a reservoir. Throughout the city, they carved hundreds of cisterns directly into the rock, some large enough to hold thousands of gallons. The surfaces of these cisterns were lined with special, waterproof plaster to prevent seepage. They also laid a sophisticated system of terracotta pipes along the sides of the Sick and through the city, using gravity to distribute this carefully harvested water to homes, gardens, and public fountains. This system was so effective that it's estimated Petra could support its population with just a few significant rainfalls each year. They turned the desert's most destructive hydrological phenomenon into its most reliable resource. This mastery of the environment extended to the very layout of the city's public and private spaces. the Nabateans oriented their major structures to take full advantage of passive solar principles. Tombs and dwellings were often positioned to avoid the harsh afternoon sun, while their entrances and windows were carefully sized and placed to capture the cooler morning light and facilitate cross-ventilation. The city's open areas, like the colonnaded street, were designed with shade in mind. While the columns themselves are mostly gone, evidence suggests they supported covered walkways, providing respite for merchants and citizens as they moved through the city center. They even created clever microclimates. By channeling water through some of these public areas, they would have increased humidity through evaporation, offering a precious moment of cool, moist air in the dry heat. This wasn't a city that simply existed in the desert. It was a city that conversed with it, that listened to the whispers of the wind and the secrets of the stone, and responded with elegant, integrated solutions. Petra stands as a timeless monument to this philosophy of cooperation with nature, a principle that allowed it to flourish as a wealthy and powerful trading hub for centuries, a rose-red city that was not just built in the desert but born from it. While the genius of individual structures like Windcatchers and rock-cut dwellings is remarkable, the true mastery of these ancient civilizations is revealed when we zoom out to view the city as a whole. They understood that comfort wasn't just a private matter confined within four walls, but a public right that needed to be engineered into the very fabric of urban life. The entire city was conceived as a single, intricate machine for producing shade, a carefully orchestrated system designed to combat the heat at a communal scale. The most immediately noticeable feature of these ancient desert cities is their street layout. Those narrow, seemingly chaotic, winding alleyways were not the result of haphazard growth. They were a deliberate and brilliant climatic strategy. By constructing buildings very close together and making the streets intentionally tight and crooked, architects created what we can think of as a man-made canyon. Just as in a natural canyon, the high walls on either side cast long, deep shadows across the street for the majority of the day. This dramatically reduced the amount of direct sunlight that could strike the ground and the lower portions of buildings, which are the primary surfaces that absorb and then re-radiate heat. This simple but effective design directly combated what we now term the urban heat island effect, where cities become significantly hotter than their surrounding rural areas due to human activities and materials. In these ancient metropolises, the urban form itself was a cooling device, ensuring that the public realm remained a usable, navigable space even during the peak hours of solar intensity. The architectural ingenuity didn't stop at street level. It reached upwards and outwards, creating a multi-layered canopy of protection. Buildings were often designed with projecting upper stories, known as jettying, where each floor extended slightly over the one below. This wasn't merely a structural quirk or a way to maximize interior space. It functioned as a permanent awning for the street and the ground floor levels of the building opposite. In many Middle Eastern and North African cities, these projecting elements would often connect across the narrow street, sometimes with bridging rooms or covered passageways, effectively turning the entire thoroughfare into a continuous, shaded corridor. This created a seamless network of cool passageways that allowed citizens to move through the city without ever being fully exposed to the oppressive sun. The materials used for these projections were also carefully considered, often wooden lattices or perforated screens that would filter the light, further diffusing its intensity and heat while still allowing for ventilation and a sense of visual connection to the outside world. This created an environment that was not just shaded but also visually soft and airy, a stark contrast to the harsh, glaring brightness of an open desert plain. Public squares and marketplaces, the bustling hearts of any city, received special attention in this grand shade scheme. Unlike the vast, exposed plazas common in some other parts of the world, the central gathering spaces in desert cities were rarely left open to the sky. Instead, they were often dominated by a large central structure, a grand mosque, a covered bazaar, or a monumental civic building, whose massive form would cast a substantial shadow for much of the day. The perimeter of the square would be lined with continuous arcades, rows of arches supported by columns, creating a covered walkway that encircled the open space. This provided a sheltered zone for socializing, commerce, and respite. Where possible, these squares were also home to another ancient and vital source of shade: trees. The planting of a large, leafy tree in a central location was an act of profound civic engineering. A single mature tree acts as a natural evaporative cooler, releasing moisture into the air through its leaves, while its canopy provides a direct shield from solar radiation. The temperature under a dense tree canopy can be many degrees cooler than in the surrounding sun-baked area, creating a precious microclimate for community life. These shaded squares became the living rooms of the city, cool islands where public life could flourish despite the external conditions. This holistic, urban-scale approach to environmental comfort represents a level of foresight that modern city planners are now urgently trying to recapture. For decades, modern urban design, with its wide, straight boulevards, vast paved surfaces, and glass and steel towers, has often exacerbated heat problems. But a growing movement in sustainable architecture is looking back to these ancient principles. The concept of sky view factor, which these builders intuitively minimized with their narrow streets, is now a calculated metric in climate-responsive design. The use of pergolas, awnings, and green roofs in contemporary projects directly echoes the projecting upper stories and shaded passages of the past. The renewed emphasis on planting urban forests and creating green corridors is a modern manifestation of the value placed on that central communal tree. The ancient builders demonstrated that the most sustainable and resilient solutions are often non-technological, rooted in a deep understanding of geometry, orientation, and the predictable movement of the sun. They crafted their cities not as imposing fortresses against nature, but as sophisticated filters that moderated the environment's extremes, proving that human habitat could be both profoundly comfortable and seamlessly integrated into the challenging landscape it occupied. But what if the ultimate solution to surviving the desert's furnace-like heat wasn't about building a better structure on the surface, but about abandoning the surface almost entirely? This brings us to one of the most direct and brilliant adaptations in human history, the choice to simply go underground. While we've seen how ancient engineers manipulated the air and the sun, they also discovered that the Earth itself held a secret, perfectly regulated climate just a few meters down. The concept is beautifully simple. The ground acts as a colossal thermal mass, but with a critical difference from a stone wall. While a surface structure heats and cools with the daily and seasonal cycles, the temperature just a few feet below the surface remains remarkably stable, insulated from the dramatic swings above. In the desert, where surface temperatures can vary by 30 or 40 degrees Fahrenheit in a single day, the subsurface might hold a constant, comfortable 60 or 70 degrees year-round. This isn't a technological innovation. It's a geological fact, and our ancestors learned to plug into this natural stability, creating entire worlds beneath the sand and rock. The modern mining town of Coober Pedy in the Australian outback offers a stunning glimpse into this timeless practice. The name itself is telling, derived from the Aboriginal phrase Coober Pedy, which roughly translates to white man's hole in the ground. When opal miners flocked to this scorching, remote region in the early 20th century, they quickly realized that the abandoned mine shafts they were digging offered far more comfort than any surface tent or shack. They began carving out proper homes or dugouts directly into the soft sandstone hillsides. Today, much of Qanat's population lives underground. You'll find not just homes but churches, hotels, shops, and even art galleries nestled within the earth. Stepping inside one of these dwellings is a surreal experience. You leave behind a landscape of blinding red dust and searing heat, and within a few steps you're in a quiet, cool, and serene environment. The air is still and dust-free, the only sound the gentle hum of a ventilation pipe drawing in fresh air. The walls, often left as the natural, textured rock, require no paint or wallpaper, and the ambient temperature is so perfect that these homes famously require no air conditioning or heating, even as the external temperature soars past 100 degrees Fahrenheit or plummets on a winter night. Qanat is a living testament to an ancient logic, proving that this is not a primitive way of life, but an incredibly efficient and comfortable one. This modern example has deep historical roots, stretching back millennia to places like the troglodyte dwellings of southern Tunisia. In regions around Matmata and the Dahar Plateau, the Berber people carved magnificent subterranean habitats into the soft, stable ground. These were not mere caves, they were sophisticated, multi-level complexes centered around a large, circular courtyard excavated straight down into the earth. From this central pit, rooms were tunneled horizontally outwards, creating a warren of living spaces, storage areas, and stables for animals. The design was a masterpiece of passive climate control. The deep courtyard acted as a natural air well, with the hot surface air rising and being replaced by cooler air from the shaded rooms and the ground itself. This created a continuous, gentle circulation. The courtyard also served as a light well and a central gathering space for families, often featuring a central drain to handle the rare but precious rainfall. These dwellings provided complete protection from the region's fierce winds and the frequent, debilitating sandstorms that could make surface life unbearable for days. For the Berber people, this was not a retreat or a life of hardship. It was a strategic and intelligent way to create a secure, comfortable, and sustainable community in one of North Africa's most challenging environments. The advantages of this subterranean strategy extend far beyond simple temperature regulation. There is a profound structural and material efficiency at play. When you build a home by excavating earth, you are not transporting heavy building materials like stone or timber across vast, difficult distances. The material you remove becomes the space you inhabit, and the structure that remains is inherently strong and stable, capable of lasting for centuries with minimal maintenance. There's also a powerful element of camouflage and security. From the surface, many of these ancient underground settlements were virtually invisible, protecting their inhabitants from raiders and conflicts. This provided a layer of safety that a surface village, with its visible walls and smoke plumes, could never guarantee. Furthermore, this way of life fosters a unique and intimate connection with the land. The inhabitants weren't just living on the earth, they were living within it. Their daily existence was a constant reminder of the planet's rhythms and resources, fostering a deep-seated respect for the environment that sustained them. Ultimately, the choice to live underground represents the pinnacle of working with the environment rather than against it. It is the most direct form of harnessing the planet's own natural systems for human comfort. There's no need for complex engineering to create thermal mass. The entire planet is your thermal mass. There's no struggle to deflect wind and dust. You are simply located beneath it. This approach required a different kind of ingenuity, one based on geology and excavation rather than architecture and aerodynamics. It was a profound understanding that sometimes the most advanced solution is not to build up, but to dig down, to seek refuge and stability in the constant, quiet, and reliable heart of the earth itself. This wasn't an admission of defeat by the harsh desert. It was a clever end run around the problem, a way to sidestep the surface conflict entirely and find a perfect pre-existing harmony deep below. Now, let your mind travel to the edge of the Sahara, where the Atlas Mountains meet the sweeping dunes. Here, rising from the ochre-colored earth as if the desert itself had decided to build a fortress, stands a Moroccan Kasbah. Its silhouette is both monumental and organic, with towering walls that seem to have been sculpted by the wind over centuries. This is not an intrusion upon the landscape. It is an extension of it, a testament to a building philosophy that understood the soul of the place. The Kasbah was far more than a defensive stronghold for tribal leaders. It was a self-contained, climate-controlled ecosystem, a masterpiece of vernacular architecture where every single design choice was a direct and elegant response to the harsh demands of the arid environment. The primary ingredient of this architectural marvel was the very ground upon which it stood. The Kasbahs were constructed using a technique known as rammed earth or pisse de terre. This was not a primitive method, but a highly sophisticated one. Workers would mix local earth with just the right amount of clay for binding, add water, and often include a small percentage of straw or lime to prevent cracking and increase tensile strength. This damp mixture was then compacted into large wooden forms, layer by layer, using heavy rammers. Once the forms were removed, what remained was a wall of incredible density and strength. The resulting structure had exceptional thermal mass, a property we've seen before, but here it was achieved with the most local and sustainable material imaginable. These massive earthen walls, sometimes several feet thick, became the Kasbah's primary climate control system. During the scorching daytime hours, the sun's intense heat would beat against the outer surface, but it would take many, many hours for that thermal energy to slowly conduct through the immense thickness of the wall. By the time the heat reached the interior living spaces, the sun was often setting, and the cool of the evening was beginning to arrive. Then the process would reverse. The warmth stored within the walls would gradually radiate inward throughout the night, mitigating the desert's characteristic chill and maintaining a remarkably stable and comfortable temperature inside. It was a natural, daily cycle of energy storage and release that required no fuel and produced no waste, a perfect symbiosis between the building and the diurnal rhythm of the desert. The intelligence of the Kasbah's design extended far beyond its thick walls to the precise choreography of light and air. The external facades are often striking for what they lack: large windows. Instead, you see only a few small, strategically placed openings. This was a deliberate defense against solar gain. These small windows, often positioned high on the walls, allowed for ventilation and a soft, diffused light to enter while minimizing the surface area exposed to the direct glare of the sun. Their placement was also calculated to promote cross-ventilation. By having openings on different sides of a room or building, the architects could harness even the faintest breeze. As wind pressed against one side of the Kasbah, it would force air in through the openings on that side, while suction effects would draw stale, warm air out through the openings on the leeward side. This created a gentle, continuous airflow through the interior spaces, flushing out hot air and replacing it with cooler air from outside, all powered by natural pressure differences. Furthermore, many of these windows were fitted with intricate wooden lattice screens known as mashrabiyah. These were not merely decorative, they were multifunctional environmental tools. The latticework broke up strong sunlight into a pattern of delicate, dappled shadows, eliminating glare and reducing the heat entering the room. At the same time, the screens provided privacy for the inhabitants while still allowing air to circulate freely. They also offered a practical function. Small shelves within the mashrabiyah would hold water jars, and the air passing through the lattice would be cooled by evaporation from the porous clay before drifting into the room. This was climate control on a micro scale, a beautiful fusion of art, privacy, and environmental engineering. Step through the heavy, often ornately carved wooden doors of a Kasbah, and you enter a world that is a complete inversion of the exterior. Instead of a fortress-like enclosure, you find yourself in a spacious, open courtyard, the true heart of the home. This central courtyard, or ryads in larger urban dwellings, is the climatic engine of the entire structure. It is an open-air space, but it functions as a private, inward-looking world. The courtyard is often shaded by trees like citrus or palms, and almost always features a central fountain or a small, shallow pool of water. This combination is the key to its cooling power. The trees provide direct shade, lowering the ambient temperature in the courtyard through evapotranspiration, the process by which plants release water vapor into the air. The fountain or pool adds further moisture to the atmosphere through evaporation. In the dry desert air, this evaporation process consumes a significant amount of thermal energy, actively cooling the surrounding space. As the air in the shaded, moistened courtyard becomes cooler and denser, it sinks towards the ground. Meanwhile, the hot air from the upper stories of the Kasbah, being lighter, naturally rises and escapes through openings designed for that purpose. This sets up a continuous convective loop. Cool air from the courtyard flows into the surrounding ground floor rooms, while hot air is drawn up and out. The courtyard, therefore, acts as a natural cooling tower, a refreshing lung for the entire building. It also served as the center of family life, a protected oasis for social gatherings, meals, and quiet contemplation, a serene sanctuary that was both socially and environmentally vital. When you combine all these elements, the immense thermal mass of the rammed earth walls, the carefully controlled ventilation, and the evaporative cooling of the central courtyard, you begin to see the Kasbah as a single, integrated system. It was a fortress, yes, but its primary defense was not just against human adversaries. It was a fortress against the climate. It stood as a bulwark against the desiccating heat, the abrasive wind, and the extreme temperature swings, creating a haven of stability and comfort within. This was architecture born from necessity, refined over generations through trial and error, and the accumulated wisdom of the local craftsmen, known as mollams. There was no single grand architect. Instead, it was a collective intelligence, a vernacular tradition that produced structures perfectly adapted to their context. The Kasbah did not fight its environment. It collaborated with it, using the earth, the wind, and the precious resource of water in a delicate, sustainable balance. It represents a high point of pre-industrial environmental design, offering a powerful lesson in how to build for extreme climates using local materials, passive systems, and a deep, respectful understanding of the natural world. In a landscape defined by its absolute thirst, the quest for water became the central drama of existence, the single greatest imperative around which every other aspect of life revolved. For the inhabitants of these desert cities, the challenge was not merely one of scarcity, but of profound unpredictability. They could not depend on the steady, reassuring flow of a great river. Instead, their survival hinged on capturing moments of hydrological violence, the sudden, terrifying flash flood that could appear from a clear sky after a distant mountain storm, or the precious few inches of rain that might fall in a single, brief, torrential downpour. Their entire civilization was, in essence, a vast and intricate machine designed to intercept, tame, and store these fleeting aqueous events. This required a shift from a reactive to a proactive mindset. They weren't waiting for water to come to them. They were actively harvesting it from the sky, the rock, and the very air, transforming its chaotic nature into a disciplined, reliable resource through some of the most ingenious hydrological engineering the world has ever known. The cornerstone of this decentralized water strategy was a network of structures designed for the gentle, patient management of water's power. In the dry riverbeds known as wadis, which lay silent and empty for most of the year, they constructed what are known as check dams. These were not the massive, towering dams we imagine today, built to hold back immense reservoirs. These were smaller, low structures made of stacked stone or compacted earth, placed strategically across the width of a wadi. Their purpose was deceptively simple: to slow down the inevitable. When a flash flood did come roaring through the canyon, a raging torrent of water, mud, and debris, these check dams would act as a series of speed bumps. They wouldn't stop the water completely, but they would impede its furious flow, reducing its destructive energy, and most importantly, forcing it to spread out and pond behind each small barrier. This slower pace gave the water time to do what was most valuable: to percolate. Instead of racing across the hard desert surface and vanishing, the water would sink down through the gravel and sand of the wadi bed, steadily recharging the groundwater table below. This was a form of banking water, depositing it into the Earth's natural savings account, where it could be accessed later through wells, safe from the evaporating glare of the sun. It was a brilliant, low-tech form of aquifer recharge, turning a catastrophic event into a long-term investment in survival. But perhaps the ultimate expression of this patient, underground approach to water management was the Qanat system, an invention so effective and elegant that its influence stretched from ancient Persia across the entire arid world. The Qanat is a testament to a different kind of engineering philosophy, one based on observation, gravity, and a deep understanding of geology. It all begins in the foothills of mountains, where rainfall and snowmelt seep into the ground, saturating porous rock layers and creating a hidden water table. The builders of a Qanat would first locate this saturated stratum, often by identifying the specific types of vegetation that grew there or by digging a series of trial shafts. Once they found the water, they would begin the monumental task of construction. They would dig a mother well, a deep vertical shaft that reached all the way down to the aquifer. Then, working with nothing more than hand tools and an incredible sense of alignment, they would begin to excavate a gently sloping underground tunnel, starting many miles away in the flatlands where their city or farms were located, and working their way back toward the mother well. This tunnel was the heart of the Qanat. Its slope was meticulously calculated, just enough of a decline for water to flow freely by gravity, but not so steep that it would erode the tunnel walls. As the tunnel was dug, construction shafts were sunk from the surface every 20 to 50 meters. These shafts served a dual purpose. They provided ventilation and light for the diggers, and for centuries after, they served as maintenance access points to keep the tunnel clear of debris and silt. The genius of this system was its profound efficiency. By running the water underground, the Qanat completely eliminated the catastrophic evaporation that would have destroyed an open canal in the desert sun. It also protected the water from contamination and from being choked by sandstorms. The Qanat delivered a constant, steady, gravity-fed trickle of water directly to the surface at the city's edge, day and night, summer and winter, with no need for pumps or any external power source. It was a perpetual motion machine of hydrology, a silent, hidden river flowing beneath the sands, and it was this invisible infrastructure that made large-scale desert agriculture and urban life not just possible but prosperous. The Qanat didn't just provide drinking water, It was the very pulse of the civilization, a lifeline engineered from the hidden veins of the earth itself. So we arrive at the Qanat, a word that might seem simple but represents one of the most profound and patient hydrological inventions in all of human history. To call it a water channel is like calling a cathedral a room. It misses the sheer scale, intelligence, and communal spirit embedded in its creation. This was not merely a ditch in the ground. It was a deliberate, slow, and meticulous act of geological persuasion, a way of convincing a mountain to share its hidden water with a parched plain many kilometers away. The principle is one of elegant simplicity, yet its execution was a feat of staggering perseverance. It all begins high in the foothills, where rainfall and snowmelt slowly percolate through the soil and into a porous, water-bearing layer of rock or sediment known as an aquifer. The builders, known as metropolises, would first have to locate this saturated stratum, often using knowledge passed down through generations or by observing the specific types of vegetation that thrived in these otherwise arid slopes. They would then dig a deep vertical shaft known as the mother well, straight down until they struck this hidden reservoir of water. This was the starting point, the taproot of the entire system. From this mother well, the true marathon of construction began. The metropolises would then begin digging the main horizontal tunnel, but they started from the opposite end, from the distant, flat location where the water was needed, be it a city, a village, or farmland. Working with an almost supernatural sense of alignment and grade, teams of diggers would excavate backwards towards the mother well, carving a gently sloping underground channel. The precision required here was breathtaking. The slope of the tunnel, its gradient, had to be perfect. It needed to be steep enough for the water to flow freely by gravity alone, ensuring a constant, steady trickle. But it also had to be shallow enough to prevent the water from gaining destructive speed that would erode the tunnel walls over time. This was surveying and engineering of the highest order, accomplished with nothing more than simple sighting tools, perhaps a plumb bob and a water-filled trench to check for level, and an immense reservoir of accumulated traditional knowledge. As the tunnel was painstakingly excavated, the workers would dig a series of vertical access shafts from the surface down to the tunnel level, spaced every 20 to 50 meters. From above, these shafts would look like a line of mysterious craters or anthills marching in a straight line across the desert landscape. These shafts were the lifelines of the operation. They provided crucial ventilation for the diggers working deep underground, allowing fresh air to circulate. They provided light, and most importantly, they served as conduits for removing the immense amounts of earth and rock being excavated from the tunnel below. This was not a project for a single lifetime. A long Qanat stretching for 40 or 50 kilometers could take generations to complete. It was an investment in the future, a gift from grandparents to their grandchildren, a physical manifestation of a community's commitment to its own long-term survival. The entire enterprise was a massive communal effort, requiring not just the diggers, but a support network of people to haul the spoil, provide food and water, and maintain the complex social organization that such a project demanded. The sheer brilliance of the Qanat system lies in how it solved the desert's two greatest water problems simultaneously: evaporation and contamination. By flowing in a sealed, underground tunnel, the water was completely protected from the relentless, desiccating sun. In an open canal in a hot, dry climate, a staggering percentage of the water can be lost to the atmosphere before it ever reaches its destination. The Qanat eliminated this loss entirely. Furthermore, because the water was filtered through layers of earth and rock and then traveled in a protected conduit, it was kept remarkably clean and free from the silt and contaminants that would choke an open channel during a dust storm or flood. What emerged at the outlet, known as the mouth of the Qanat, was a clear, cool, and constant stream. This was not a seasonal trickle or a sporadic flow. It was a reliable, year-round source of water. It would often pour into a communal pool or be channeled through a network of smaller surface canals to irrigate fields. This steady, dependable flow is what made desert agriculture not just a hopeful gamble, but a sustainable practice. It turned the blinding yellow of a barren landscape into the vibrant green of date palm orchards, fields of barley, and lush fruit gardens. These subterranean aqueducts truly were the hidden, beating arteries of the desert city. While the grand temples and palaces stood as monuments to power and wealth above ground, it was the silent, dark flow of the Qanat that gave that power and wealth its meaning. A city's prosperity could literally be measured by the number and flow rate of its Qanats. This was a technology so revolutionary, so perfectly adapted to its purpose, that it did not remain a secret. Originating in ancient Persia over 2,500 years ago, the knowledge of the Qanat spread like the water within it, flowing along trade routes and through conquest. It moved west across North Africa, where it is known as a fagara, and into the Arabian Peninsula, where it is called a falaj. It even traveled as far as Spain, brought by the Moors, and eastward to Central Asia and as far as Western China. In every arid region it touched, it enabled the same miracle, the flourishing of life in places that had previously been written off as uninhabitable. The Qanat stands as a timeless testament to a different kind of progress, one not measured in speed or power, but in patience, cooperation, and a deep, respectful dialogue with the hidden secrets of the earth. With a lifeline of water secured through astonishing feats of engineering, the next monumental challenge emerged: how to transform that precious liquid into sustenance for thousands. The answer lies in what can only be described as agricultural alchemy, a profound and knowledgeable partnership with a seemingly barren land. This was not the farming of lush river valleys with their deep, nutrient-rich soils and predictable floods. This was farming in a furnace, a high-stakes endeavor that required a completely different philosophy. The goal was not to dominate the land, but to collaborate with it, to identify and amplify its hidden strengths while mitigating its harsh realities. The farmers of these desert cities became masters of efficiency, learning to coax abundance from the margins through an intimate understanding of their environment, turning scarcity into a catalyst for innovation. The first and most crucial act of this alchemy was the intelligent selection of crops. Instead of trying to force water-hungry plants to survive, they built their entire agricultural system around species that were naturally pre-adapted to aridity. The date palm was the undisputed king of this resilient garden. This remarkable tree was the cornerstone of desert life, a true multi-purpose organism. Its deep taproots could seek out water far below the surface, and its rough, waxy fronds minimized water loss. The dates themselves were a dense, nutritious, and easily stored source of calories, sugar, and essential vitamins. But the tree's value didn't stop there. Its trunk provided timber for construction, its fronds were woven into baskets and roofing material, and its shade created a precious microclimate underneath. In this cooler, shadier zone, they could cultivate a second layer of more delicate crops that would never survive the full force of the sun, such as vegetables, herbs, and legumes like lentils and chickpeas. Alongside the date palm, they cultivated hardy grains like barley, which requires significantly less water than wheat, and drought-resistant trees like the olive, which thrives in well-drained, sunny slopes. These crops formed a resilient, layered food system, a carefully curated portfolio of plants that were not just surviving, but actively thriving in the challenging conditions. The intelligence of their approach extended deep into the very soil and the layout of their fields. They understood that in a desert, water is only half the battle. You must also convince the soil to hold onto that moisture long enough for the plants to use it. One of their most effective techniques was terracing. On the rocky slopes surrounding their cities, they would construct a series of stepped, level terraces supported by stone walls. These terraces were far more than just flat planting surfaces. They were sophisticated erosion and moisture control systems. When the rare rain did fall, instead of cascading down the hillside in a destructive torrent, carrying away the precious topsoil, the terraces would capture the water. Each level wall would act as a small dam, forcing the water to slow down, pond, and gently soak into the soil of the terrace. This prevented runoff and gave every single drop of rainwater time to penetrate deep into the ground, directly to the root zones of the crops. The stone-retaining walls themselves would also absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night, moderating the temperature around the plants and protecting them from the most extreme frosts. Perhaps even more ingenious was the creation of sunken gardens. In flatter areas, farmers would actually dig down, creating planting beds that were below the level of the surrounding ground. This seemingly simple act had multiple powerful benefits. By sinking the garden, they was placing the crop's roots closer to the cooler, moister subsurface layers of the soil, where evaporation happened much more slowly. The sunken bed also acted as a natural trap for any dew that formed during the night, channeling that minimal moisture directly to the plants. Furthermore, the excavated soil would often be piled up around the edges of the garden, creating low walls that provided additional shade for the young seedlings during the hottest part of the day and acting as a windbreak to reduce drying winds. This was a perfect example of working with the physics of the environment using gravity and temperature gradients to their advantage, creating a localized, favorable microclimate with nothing more than a shovel and deep understanding. The pursuit of water, however, did not stop at the ground. In some of the most inventive applications of this ancient wisdom, farmers learned to harvest moisture directly from the air itself. In coastal desert regions where cool ocean currents meet hot land, dense fog banks are a common occurrence. Cultures in places like the Canary Islands and the Atacama Desert developed large, vertical nets made from local fibers or reeds, which they would erect on hillsides facing the prevailing wind. As the fog rolled in, countless tiny water droplets would condense on the mesh of the net, coalescing into larger drops that would then trickle down into collection gutters and channels, directing the harvested water into storage tanks or directly to the fields. This was literally farming the clouds. In other inland areas, they constructed dew ponds. These were shallow, wide depressions, often lined with a layer of clay or stone, and sometimes covered with a layer of straw. The design was optimized to radiate heat quickly at night, cooling the surface below the ambient air temperature. This temperature difference would cause atmospheric moisture to condense on the cool surface of the pond, just like dew forms on grass. While each pond might only collect a small amount of water each night, over time and across many such ponds, it provided a vital supplementary source of non-salty water for both animals and crops. This practice of atmospheric water harvesting represents the absolute zenith of this agricultural philosophy. It was a testament to human ingenuity that looked beyond the obvious, finding life-giving resources in the most intangible of places. What emerges from all these techniques is a picture of a deeply sophisticated and sustainable agricultural system. This was not brute force farming that sought to overwhelm the environment with irrigation. It was a delicate, knowledgeable dance. It was a system built on observation, on generations of accumulated wisdom about local microclimates, soil types, and plant behavior. Every element was designed for maximum efficiency and minimum waste. The choice of crops, the shape of the fields, the harvesting of fog, and all of it was part of a coherent, holistic strategy for living within the means of a limited environment. This ancient alchemy proves a powerful and enduring lesson that true abundance is not necessarily a function of overwhelming natural wealth, but can be cultivated through intelligence, adaptation, and a respectful partnership with the world around us. They demonstrated that even in the most unlikely and challenging places, human creativity, when applied with patience and wisdom, can perform miracles of sustenance. Now let us turn our gaze to the heart of the Syrian desert, where the ruins of Palmyra stand as a hauntingly beautiful testament to a city that perfectly fused immense wealth with environmental genius. Its very name, derived from the word for palm tree, evokes an image of a lush haven, and for centuries, that is precisely what it was. Palmyra's legendary prosperity was built on a geographical jackpot. It sat at a critical crossroads between the Roman Empire to the west and the Parthian, and later Sasanian, empires to the east. Caravans laden with Chinese silks, Indian spices, Arabian perfumes, and Persian carpets would all converge here, making it one of the wealthiest and most cosmopolitan cities of the ancient world. But this economic fortune would have been meaningless without a parallel fortune in survival technology. The Palmyrans understood that their glittering metropolis, surrounded by an ocean of sand and rock, was a fragile creation. Its enduring success was not an accident of trade, but the direct result of a sophisticated and multi-layered strategy to harness, store, and conserve every possible drop of water while designing a built environment that actively fought the desert climate. The most fundamental challenge was, as always, water. There were no great rivers flowing through Palmyra. Its lifeline was a single, precious spring, the Efka, which bubbled up at the foot of the city's northern hills. But a spring alone could never quench the thirst of a major city and the thousands of camels in its caravans. The Palmyrans, therefore, became masters of rainwater harvesting on a colossal scale. They looked at the vast, rocky plains surrounding their city and saw not barren ground, but a giant catchment area. They engineered a network of subterranean reservoirs and cisterns that was nothing short of monumental. These were not small, personal cellars for water. They were enormous communal underground tanks, often carved directly into the bedrock and lined with waterproof plaster. Their system was designed to capture the region's infrequent but often violent downpours. They would channel the torrential runoff from these storms through a series of diversion walls and canals into these hidden reservoirs, safely storing millions of gallons of water beneath the city, protected from the evaporating sun and the contaminating dust. This ensured that long after the seasonal rains had passed, Palmyra had a deep, reliable water reserve to draw upon, turning a climate of scarcity into one of managed abundance. This hydrological intelligence was mirrored above ground by an architectural brilliance focused squarely on human comfort. The most iconic feature of Palmyra, its magnificent Great Colonnade, was far more than a grand processional avenue designed to impress visitors. It was a masterclass in practical urban design. Stretching for over a kilometer, this wide street was flanked on both sides by a continuous covered walkway, supported by hundreds of towering columns. These colonnades provided a vital, shaded promenade for the thousands of merchants, travelers, and citizens who moved through the city every day. A person could walk the entire length of the city's main artery while remaining almost entirely in the cool, protective shadow of these stone arcades. This was public infrastructure serving a critical climatic function, ensuring that commerce and social life could continue uninterrupted even during the most intense heat of the day. The columns themselves, crafted from the local light-colored limestone, acted as a thermal shield. Their pale hue had a high albedo, reflecting a significant portion of the sun's radiant energy rather than absorbing it, which helped to keep the ambient temperature in the shaded walkways several degrees cooler than the open, sun-baked street. The city's grand public buildings and lavish tomb towers continued this theme of climate-responsive design. The Temple of Bel, one of the largest and most important religious sites of the ancient world, was constructed from massive blocks of the same local limestone. The choice of material was deliberate. The stone's thermal mass helped to stabilize the interior temperature of the temple complex, but the design went beyond just the walls. The layout of these structures often incorporated large courtyards and strategically placed portals that were designed to catch and funnel the prevailing breezes, promoting a natural flow of air that would ventilate the interior spaces and carry away stale, hot air. Even in death, the Pomerans applied this principle. Their distinctive multi-story tomb towers, which rose from the desert like silent sentinels, were not just monuments to the deceased. Their intricate internal layouts and ventilation shafts suggest an understanding that managing the internal environment, even in a funerary structure, was part of creating a lasting and dignified legacy. Every aspect of the city, from its vast underground waterworks to the shade of its colonnades and the orientation of its temples, spoke of a civilization that had seamlessly woven environmental mastery into the very fabric of its urban identity. Palmyra was a place where economic ambition was perfectly tempered by ecological wisdom, a glittering oasis where trade and technology merged to create one of the most dazzling and sophisticated hubs of the ancient world. Consider the sheer scale of a single Qanat, an underground water channel stretching for miles, built and maintained entirely by hand. This was not a project for a lone family or a wealthy individual. It was an endeavor that demanded the coordinated effort of an entire community. The survival of a desert city hinged on this kind of profound social cooperation, proving that the most brilliant engineering is meaningless without the human network to support it. While we've marveled at the physical structures, the wind towers, the stone cisterns, the subterranean tunnels, the true, invisible architecture was the social fabric itself, a complex web of shared responsibility, mutual dependence, and carefully negotiated rules that bound everyone together in a common struggle for survival. The desert did not just shape their buildings, it sculpted their very society, fostering a collective spirit where individual fortune was inextricably linked to the well-being of the whole. This spirit was most visibly tested in the monumental task of building, and just as importantly, maintaining the Qanat systems. The initial excavation was a generational project. Teams of specialized diggers, known as muqanis, would spend their entire lives slowly, painstakingly carving the underground tunnels, passing their skills and knowledge down to their sons. But they did not work in isolation. They required a support system of people on the surface to haul away the excavated earth, to provide food and water, and to manufacture and maintain their tools. The entire community, in one way or another, invested in this long-term project, understanding that they might not live to see the water flow, but their children and grandchildren would. This required a radical long-term perspective, a stark contrast to our often short-sighted modern cycles. Even after construction, the work was never done. A Qanat was a living system constantly under threat from collapses, siltation, and root intrusions. Regular cleaning and repair were essential, and this, too, was a communal duty. Villages would organize annual or seasonal cleaning campaigns where every able-bodied person had a role to play. It was hard, dangerous work, descending into the dark, confined tunnels to clear blockages, but it was work upon which every single life in the community depended. This shared labor forged a powerful sense of shared identity and purpose. You weren't just maintaining a water channel, you were actively preserving the lifeblood of your family, your neighbors, and your entire way of life. With such a precious and limited resource, the potential for conflict was immense. A single farmer diverting a little extra water upstream could spell disaster for those downstream. To prevent this, these societies developed some of the world's earliest and most sophisticated systems of water law and resource distribution. These were not arbitrary rules imposed from above, but intricate, culturally embedded traditions that evolved over centuries to ensure fairness and prevent the water wars that could destroy a community. In many cultures, water rights were not tied to land ownership but were considered a separate, inheritable property. Time, rather than volume, was often the unit of measurement. A carefully designed water clock like the ancient Persian fenjan, a bowl with a small hole that would sink in a precise amount of time, was used to allocate irrigation slots to different farmers. A council of elders or a trusted water master would oversee this distribution, their authority respected because their impartiality was essential for communal survival. The schedules were often complex and cyclical, ensuring that everyone, from the most powerful landowner to the smallest subsistence farmer, received their fair share at different times. This system required an extraordinary level of trust and social discipline. It meant that your neighbor's success was not a threat to your own, but a sign that the system was working for everyone. This carefully maintained equity was the social glue that held the desert city together, transforming a potential source of bitter conflict into a foundation of social stability. This ethos of cooperation extended far beyond water, permeating every aspect of economic and social life. The harvest, for instance, was another all-hands-on-deck endeavor. When the dates were ripe or the barley was ready, the entire community would mobilize. People would work on each other's fields in a rotating sequence, ensuring that the perishable crops were brought in quickly and efficiently before the intense heat could spoil them. This collective labor pool was a form of social insurance. It meant that a family struck by illness or misfortune would not lose their entire annual sustenance. This mutual dependence fostered a culture of hospitality that became legendary in desert regions. To deny shelter, food, or water to a traveler was not just a social faux pas, it was a profound moral failure. In an environment where a single day without water could mean death, every stranger was a potential lifesaver in the future, and every act of generosity was an investment in a network of survival that stretched across the vast, empty landscape. The famous hospitality of desert cultures is not merely a charming tradition. It is a direct and pragmatic outcome of living in a world where individual survival is a statistical impossibility. The very structure of the city itself reflected this communal priority. While we admire the grand palaces and temples, the most important spaces were often the shared ones, the public cistern where everyone drew their water, the shaded courtyard of the mosque or caravanserai where travelers and locals mingled, and the communal threshing floors and ovens. These were the nodes of the social network, the places where information was exchanged, disputes were settled, and collective decisions were made. The society that emerged from this harsh environment was, out of sheer necessity, more egalitarian and horizontally organized than many of its contemporaries. While there were certainly leaders and elites, their power was often checked by the practical demands of resource management. A sheikh or a village council that failed to ensure the fair distribution of water or organize the maintenance of the Qanats would quickly lose legitimacy. Leadership was less about privilege and more about responsibility, about being the steward of the community's most vital assets. This created a social contract built on demonstrated competence and a proven commitment to the common good. a model of governance that was resilient because it was so directly tied to the inescapable realities of the environment. The lesson these ancient cities leave us is stark and profoundly relevant. They demonstrate that technological innovation, no matter how brilliant, is fragile and short-lived without the social cohesion to sustain it. A solar panel is just a piece of silicon without a community that agrees on how to use and maintain it. A water purification plant is useless without the collective will to conserve and share its output fairly. The ultimate resource was not water or stone or wind. It was trust, cooperation, and a shared sense of purpose. In our own era of environmental challenges and strained social bonds, their legacy is a powerful reminder that our survival may ultimately depend less on what we can build and more on how we choose to build it together. And so we arrive at a beautiful paradox of these desert civilizations. One might assume that the constant, grinding struggle for survival in such a harsh world would strip away any concern for aesthetics, reducing life and its creations to pure, brutal utility. But the opposite is true. The very constraints of the desert did not stifle artistry. They became its muse, forging a unique and powerful aesthetic where beauty was not an afterthought, but an intrinsic quality of survival itself. Every design choice, every ornament, every selection of material was a multi-layered answer to a complex set of problems. This was a world where the line between an artist and an engineer was beautifully blurred, resulting in an environment where you couldn't separate what was beautiful from what was necessary, because they were, in fact, the very same thing. This is the profound elegance of adaptation, where human creativity, when pressed against the limits of possibility, produces its most resonant and enduring forms. Consider the humble yet magnificent mashrabiyah screen. To the untrained eye, it is a stunning piece of wooden latticework, a complex geometric pattern that casts intricate, shifting shadows across a room. It is undeniably beautiful, a testament to the skill of the woodworker, but to see it only as decoration is to miss its genius entirely. This screen is a masterclass in integrated design. Its primary function was to provide privacy for the inhabitants, a crucial consideration in densely populated urban homes. But in achieving that privacy, it also solved two critical environmental challenges. The intricate interlocking patterns of the lattice break the harsh, direct desert sunlight into 1,000 tiny, softened points of light, eliminating glare and dramatically reducing the solar heat entering the room. At the same time, the open nature of the lattice allows air to pass through it freely. A breeze cannot be given privacy, so it is invited in, cooled as it passes over water jars often placed on a shelf within the screen's projection, and then circulated into the living space. The mashrabiyah is therefore privacy, climate control, and art, all woven together into a single, elegant object. Its beauty is not applied on top of its function. Its beautiful pattern is its function. This is a theme that repeats itself across the desert city, from the carved stone grills of temples that let light and air dance into sacred spaces, to the patterned ventilation holes high in the walls of homes. Ornamentation was never frivolous. It was purposeful, a physical manifestation of a solution that honored both the human spirit and the body's need for comfort. This philosophy of integrated beauty extended to the very palette of the city, drawn directly and exclusively from the surrounding landscape. There were no brightly painted facades shipped in from distant lands. The color scheme of the city was the color of the earth itself, the rich reddish-brown of sun-baked mud brick, the soft ochre and beige of local limestone, the warm, honeyed tones of sandstone, and the rugged, textured gray of uncut rock. When you build with the earth you stand on, something remarkable happens. The city begins to feel as if it has grown from the ground, rather than being placed upon it. This is not a matter of camouflage but of harmony. A building made of mud brick doesn't fight the desert, it acknowledges it, becoming a part of the geological story. The use of palm wood for ceilings, supports, and doors added another natural element, its fibrous, grainy texture providing a visual warmth and organic counterpoint to the mineral solidity of the stone and earth. This limited local palette forced an incredible creativity within its constraints. Architects and builders played with texture, with form, with the play of light and shadow across a rough-hewn surface to create visual interest. The beauty emerged from the honesty of the materials, from the sheer skill required to shape mud and stone into soaring arches, domes, and vaults. The resulting city was not a jarring spectacle imposed on the land, but a serene and dignified presence that felt utterly and completely rooted in its place, a visual poem written in sand, stone, and sun. Perhaps no single space encapsulates this fusion more perfectly than the central courtyard. In the heart of a traditional desert home, behind high, windowless walls, lies a secret world, a peaceful, open-air courtyard. It is often filled with fragrant jasmine or citrus trees, its floor paved with cool stone, and at its very center, a fountain bubbles softly, its water catching the sunlight. On the surface, this is a scene of pure, idyllic beauty, a private paradise. But every single element of this paradise is a working part of a sophisticated environmental machine. The high walls provide shade and security. The trees are not merely decorative, they provide a second layer of shade and, through the process of evapotranspiration, release moisture into the air. And the fountain, the beautiful, heart-stirring centerpiece, is the engine of cooling. In the dry desert air, the evaporation from the fountain's surface actively consumes heat energy, lowering the temperature of the immediate surroundings. This cooler, denser air then sinks and is drawn into the surrounding rooms, while the hot air from those rooms rises and escapes through high windows or wind towers. The courtyard is the lung of the house, a natural air conditioner where the soothing sight and sound of water are direct indicators of its life-giving function. The beauty of the courtyard is not separate from its purpose. Its serene aesthetics are the direct and delightful result of its physical performance. To sit in such a space is to experience comfort on every level: physical, psychological, and spiritual, all generated by the same elegant, integrated system. What we witness in these cities is the emergence of a profound and practical beauty, a testament to the idea that necessity is not the enemy of art, but often its most demanding and inspiring teacher. The relentless constraints of the desert, the lack of water, the scorching sun, the limited materials forced a problem-solving creativity that elevated mere construction to the level of high culture. There was no room for waste, for superfluous decoration, for elements that served only to impress. Every curve, every pattern, every choice of material had to earn its place by contributing to the fundamental goals of survival and comfort. This pressure cooker of innovation produced an architectural language that is timeless because it is so honest, so directly connected to the human condition and its relationship with a specific place. It demonstrates that the most meaningful beauty is not an escape from reality, but a deeper engagement with it. It is the beauty of a solution so perfect that it resonates on every level, a beauty forged in the crucible of necessity, proving that when our creativity is focused by genuine need, it can produce environments that are not just places to live, but profound and enduring works of art. It's a striking turn of events that in our age of smart glass and computational fluid dynamics, some of the most forward-thinking architectural minds are looking not to the future for answers, but deep into the past. The very principles we've explored, passive cooling, thermal mass, and natural ventilation, are no longer seen as quaint historical footnotes. they are being actively rediscovered and re-engineered as a vital toolkit for a sustainable future. This isn't about nostalgia or creating replicas of ancient ruins. It's about a profound paradigm shift in how we conceive of building, especially in the world's increasingly arid and heat-stressed regions. Modern architecture for much of the 20th century became dominated by a philosophy of technological triumphalism. The idea was that we could conquer any climate with enough energy, sealing buildings in glass and conditioning the air inside with powerful mechanical systems. But the environmental and economic costs of this approach are now impossible to ignore. The relentless hum of air conditioning units has become the soundtrack to urban sprawl in deserts from Phoenix to Dubai, consuming staggering amounts of electricity and contributing to the very climate change that makes their use so necessary. It's an unsustainable feedback loop, and a growing movement of architects and engineers is realizing that the way out might be the way back to a time-tested logic of working with nature rather than overpowering it. We can see this renaissance of ancient wisdom in contemporary buildings that are as intelligent as they are beautiful. Take the modern reinterpretation of the Badger, the Windcatcher. You can now find structures in places like Masdar City in Abu Dhabi or the Visitor Center at Zion National Park in Utah that feature sleek, contemporary versions of these ancient towers. They aren't simple copies, they are often hybrid systems, using sensors and lightweight, aerodynamic materials to optimize their performance. A modern Badger might automatically adjust its louvers to capture the slightest breeze, funneling it down into a building's atrium to create a natural draft that reduces the need for mechanical cooling by a significant margin. Similarly, the principle of thermal mass is being employed with new materials and precision. While ancient builders used thick mud, brick, or stone, today's architects might use massive, exposed concrete slabs or even phase change materials embedded in walls and ceilings. These advanced materials absorb heat during the day and release it at night, mimicking the natural temperature stabilizing effect of a centuries-old Kasbah wall, but with even greater efficiency. The goal is the same: to flatten the daily temperature curve and create a stable, comfortable interior environment using the building's own physical properties as a battery. The ancient mastery of water is also finding new expression. The concept of the Qanat, that gently sloping underground channel, is being reborn in the form of sophisticated greywater and rainwater recycling systems. Instead of letting precious rainwater run off into storm drains, modern sustainable buildings channel it into underground cisterns, much like the Nabateans did in Petra. This harvested water is then filtered and reused for irrigation, for flushing toilets, or even for cooling towers. Green roofs, another increasingly common feature, function like the hanging gardens of a modern metropolis. A layer of soil and vegetation on a rooftop does more than just look pretty. It provides exceptional insulation, keeping the building cooler in summer and warmer in winter. It also absorbs stormwater, reduces the urban heat island effect, and creates a habitat for wildlife. This is a direct echo of the ancient practice of using courtyards with gardens and fountains for evaporative cooling, but scaled up to an urban level. It's a holistic approach that sees water not as a waste product to be disposed of, but as a closed-loop resource to be cherished and reused, a philosophy that would have been completely familiar to the builders of Palmyra or Yazd. This isn't to say that we are simply abandoning modern technology. The true genius of this movement lies in the synthesis of old and new. Architects are using advanced computer modeling to simulate sun paths and wind patterns with incredible accuracy, allowing them to orient buildings and design shading structures with a precision that ancient builders could only achieve through generations of observation. They are combining massive thermal walls with high-performance insulation. They are pairing windcatchers with low-energy fans to boost airflow on still days. This hybrid approach acknowledges that the ancient principles provide the foundational logic for comfort and sustainability, while modern materials and digital tools allow us to execute that logic with unprecedented effectiveness and scale. The Pearl Academy of Fashion in Jaipur, India, designed by Morphogenesis, is a stunning example of this fusion. The entire building is wrapped in a perforated stone screen, a contemporary mashrabiyah that filters harsh sunlight and facilitates natural ventilation, effectively reducing the building's energy consumption by over half compared to a conventional design. It is a building that is deeply modern in its form, yet its soul is ancient. This revival is more than just a technical exercise, it's a powerful philosophical correction. For decades, the narrative of progress was linear, suggesting that newer was always better and that older methods were obsolete. The return to these ancient strategies challenges that assumption head-on. It suggests that true innovation isn't always about inventing something entirely new, but often about rediscovering a timeless logic that we lost in our rush toward industrialization. These principles represent a form of deeply embedded bioclimatic intelligence, a way of building that is specific to a place, that uses local materials, and that responds directly to local climate conditions. They remind us that sustainability is not a product you can bolt onto a building. It is a fundamental design philosophy that must be woven into its very fabric from the beginning. The legacy of the desert cities is therefore not just a collection of clever tricks for keeping cool. It is a masterclass in resilience, a demonstration that the most elegant and enduring solutions are often those that align with the natural forces of the world, rather than trying to defy them. As we face a future of rising temperatures and resource constraints, this ancient wisdom is no longer a historical curiosity. It is an urgent and invaluable guide, offering a path toward a built environment that is not only more sustainable but also more humane, more comfortable, and deeply connected to the world it inhabits. Yet for all their brilliance and resilience, the glittering oases of the desert were not invincible. Their existence was a delicate, high-wire act, and history shows us that even the most sophisticated civilizations could be undone by the very environment they had so skillfully harnessed. The fall of these great cities is a sobering chapter in their story, a stark reminder that human ingenuity, no matter how advanced, exists within a larger, dynamic natural system that is never truly static. Often, the culprit was not a sudden invasion or a dramatic political collapse, but something far more insidious and gradual, a slow, creeping shift in the environmental conditions that had once been the foundation of their prosperity. The most formidable enemy they faced turned out to be change itself, particularly the silent, accumulating pressures of a climate in flux. Consider the lifeblood of any desert city, its water. A prolonged drought, stretching for decades or even centuries, could spell the end for a metropolis that had been thriving for 1,000 years. The intricate Qanat systems and vast cisterns were engineering marvels, but they were designed to manage a known range of climatic variability. They could store water from seasonal rains and channel occasional flash floods, but they could not create water from nothing. When the rain patterns shifted permanently, when the mountains received less snowfall to feed the aquifers, the mother wells of the Qanats would gradually run dry. The gentle, gravity-fed flow that had nourished fields and fountains for generations would slow to a trickle and then stop altogether. Without this constant replenishment, the hidden veins of the earth went empty. The city's agricultural base would wither first, leading to famine and the loss of the wealth that supported its complex society. As the people began to leave in search of water, the social structures that maintained the water systems themselves would disintegrate. A single generation of neglect was enough for a Qanat to silt up and collapse, severing the city's connection to its source of life for good. It was a vicious, slow-motion chain reaction, where a climatic shift triggered an engineering failure, which in turn led to social collapse. Beyond the direct threat of drought, these civilizations sometimes inadvertently sowed the seeds of their own destruction through the over-exploitation of the resources around them. As a city grew in population and wealth, its demand for fuel and building materials soared. The surrounding landscape, which might have been a sparse but stable ecosystem of drought-resistant shrubs and trees, would be systematically stripped for firewood, for baking clay into bricks, and for constructing roofs and supports. This deforestation, while solving an immediate need, had catastrophic long-term consequences. The plant roots that once held the thin, fragile desert soil in place were gone. Without that anchor, the topsoil was left vulnerable to the very wind they had so cleverly harnessed. The same breezes that once cooled their homes now became agents of erosion, scouring the land and carrying away the fertile layer essential for agriculture. This process, known as desertification, is a form of ecological suicide. The city was literally consuming the foundation of its own food supply. Furthermore, the loss of vegetation reduced the land's ability to absorb and retain what little rainfall there was, creating a feedback loop of increasing aridity. The desert, which they had held at bay for centuries, was now advancing, reclaiming its territory not through force, but through the thoughtless actions of its inhabitants. The story of the ancient city of Petra provides a poignant and powerful example of this complex interplay of factors. For centuries, the Nabateans thrived, their genius for water management turning the rocky landscape into a verdant hub. But by the time the Roman Empire annexed the region, the city was already facing immense strain. To support its growing population and its role as a major Roman outpost, the demand for resources skyrocketed. Vast areas of forest were cleared for construction, agriculture, and to fuel the lime kilns needed for the Roman-style plaster and concrete used in new buildings. This deforestation on the surrounding plateaus led to severe erosion. When the rains did come, instead of being absorbed slowly into the ground to recharge the aquifers that fed Petra's springs and cisterns, the water rushed off the barren slopes in violent, uncontrolled torrents. These floods were far more destructive than the carefully managed flows the Nabatean system was designed to handle. They would have overwhelmed the diversion dams and silted up the intricate network of channels and reservoirs, crippling the very water system that was the city's reason for being. Petra's decline was likely not caused by a single event, but by this deadly combination, a possibly changing climate that brought less reliable rain, compounded by human actions that degraded the environment and made the city profoundly vulnerable to the storms that did arrive. Its magnificent facades, carved with such skill and effort, were ultimately abandoned not just to conquering armies, but to the slow, patient, and relentless force of environmental change. This narrative is not merely a historical curiosity, it is a cautionary tale with profound resonance for our modern world. These ancient cities demonstrate that technological mastery is not a permanent shield. It can create a fragile bubble of prosperity that masks underlying vulnerabilities. Their greatest lesson may be that sustainability is not a state to be achieved, but a continuous process of adaptation and balance. They fell when they could no longer adapt, when the rate of environmental change exceeded their capacity to respond, or when their own success led them to consume the natural capital upon which they depended. In our own era of rapid climate change and resource depletion, their ruins stand as silent sentinels, reminding us that no society, no matter how advanced or seemingly secure, is immune to the consequences of a disrupted natural world. Their legacy is a dual one, a brilliant blueprint for living in harmony with the Earth, and a solemn warning of what happens when that delicate balance is lost. Long before the language of physics and engineering gave us terms like thermal mass and evaporative cooling, humanity had a different, yet equally powerful, vocabulary for understanding the immense forces of the desert. This was the language of myth and religion, a rich tapestry of stories that gave names, faces, and intentions to the sun, the wind, and the stone. The people who built these impossible cities did not see a ball of incandescent plasma in the sky. They saw Ra, the Egyptian sun god, crossing the heavens in his solar bark, his presence both the giver of life and the bringer of a scorching, unforgiving glare. They did not experience shifts in atmospheric pressure. They felt the breath of a wind spirit, a jinn or a god like the Mesopotamian Enlil, who could bestow a life-saving breeze one moment and summon a sand-blasting tempest the next. And the mountains and cliffs were not merely inert geological formations. They were the sacred bones of the earth, the dwelling places of powerful deities or the petrified bodies of ancient giants. This mythological framework was not a primitive denial of reality, but a profoundly human way of making sense of a world that was both breathtakingly beautiful and terrifyingly powerful. It was a system of meaning that allowed them to engage with their environment on an emotional and spiritual level, transforming a chaotic and indifferent natural world into a landscape populated by beings with whom one could negotiate, whom one could honor, and whom one must, above all, respect. This cultural narrative was far more than just a collection of fascinating stories. It was a sophisticated mechanism for encoding and transmitting essential survival knowledge. The reverence for the sun, for instance, was not abstract. The daily journey of a deity like Ra, from birth at dawn to death at dusk, mirrored the essential human rhythm of the desert. His fierce power at midday demanded specific behaviors, retreating to the shade, ceasing labor during the hottest hours, and offering prayers or rituals to appease his wrath. This religious observance, in practice, enforced a crucial survival strategy: avoiding heat stroke and conserving energy. The mythology provided a compelling reason to follow a pattern of life that was, in fact, a matter of life and death. Similarly, the belief in capricious wind spirits directly influenced practical architecture. To build a home that angered the wind gods was to invite destruction. Therefore, the careful orientation of a city's streets to channel gentle breezes, or the construction of a windcatcher to invite a cool djinn into the home, was not just good engineering, it was an act of spiritual diplomacy. It was a way of building that said, "We acknowledge your power and we humbly ask for your favor." The myths gave a sacred justification for the precise, environmentally responsive urban planning we now analyze with satellite imagery and computer models. The knowledge of how to live was wrapped in a story of why one must live that way, ensuring that the hard-won lessons of survival were passed down through generations not as dry instructions, but as compelling, unforgettable narratives. This fusion of the sacred and the practical is perhaps most beautifully illustrated in the relationship between people and stone. We have already seen how practically brilliant it was to carve a city like Petra directly into the cliff face. But for the Nabateans, this was not merely a construction technique, it was a spiritual act. The rose-red sandstone was not just a convenient material, it was believed to be imbued with the divine presence of their god, Dashara, who was often worshipped in the form of an unshaped, rectangular stone block. To carve a magnificent temple facade into the living rock was not to deface a mountain, but to reveal the god residing within it. It was an act of collaboration with the divine essence of the place. This sacred perspective fostered a profound respect for the material. You would not wastefully quarry the stone because the stone itself was holy. You would use it with intention and reverence, understanding that you were shaping the very body of a deity into a home for your people and a place for your worship. This cultural belief system acted as a powerful form of environmental conservation. It instilled a deep-seated ethic of using only what was needed and honoring the source of that material. The mountain was not a resource to be exploited, but a partner in creation, a sacred entity that provided shelter, security, and a direct connection to the divine. Ultimately, this mythological world, you added a layer of profound meaning to the daily, grinding struggle for survival. The arduous task of maintaining a Qanat, for example, was not just back-breaking labor. It was a ritual of communion with the hidden water deities of the underworld. Descending into the dark, cool tunnel to clear silt was like entering a sacred cavern, a direct engagement with the life-giving forces that flowed beneath the surface of the world. The fair distribution of water, governed by intricate laws and water clocks, was not merely a legal or social contract. It was a religious duty, a way of ensuring that the gift of the gods was shared justly among the community. A farmer irrigating his field at his appointed time was participating in a cosmic order, a harmony between the human, the divine, and the natural world. This cultural layer transformed the desert from a harsh adversary into a meaningful landscape. Every gust of wind, every ray of sun, every stone underfoot was part of a grand, intelligible story. This did not make life easier, but it made it more bearable, more significant. It provided a framework for resilience that was as much psychological and spiritual as it was physical. In a world where death by thirst or heat was a constant possibility, believing that the elements were conscious forces with whom one could have a relationship offered a kind of courage and perseverance that pure pragmatism alone could never provide. Their mythology was the soul of their survival, the story they told themselves about who they were and why their impossible, beautiful cities were worth the immense effort it took to build them. The very act of making a mud brick was a chemical experiment conducted on a grand scale. It began with knowing the land, reading the soil underfoot not as mere dirt, but as a complex matrix with distinct properties. Primary ingredient was clay, a wonderfully plastic material that could be shaped and molded when wet, but a brick made from pure clay would be a disaster. As it dried, it would shrink dramatically, cracking into useless fragments. The solution, discovered through generations of experimentation, was to add a precise amount of sand. The sand particles acted as a skeleton within the clay, creating millions of tiny internal barriers that reduced shrinkage and prevented those fatal cracks. This was the first critical step in the recipe, a balancing act between plasticity and stability that every brick maker had to master, but strength was only part of the equation. A mud brick also had to withstand the occasional, devastating desert downpour. To solve this, ancient engineers turned to an unexpected reinforcing agent, chopped straw. This wasn't just a filler, it was a primitive but brilliant form of fiber reinforcement. The long, straw fibers created a tangled network throughout the brick, much like the rebar woven into modern concrete. This network dramatically increased the brick's tensile strength, its resistance to being pulled or bent. When forces acted upon the brick, these fibers distributed the stress, preventing the formation of large cracks. Furthermore, the straw acted like a wick, helping to draw moisture evenly through the brick as it dried, which led to a more uniform cure and a harder final product. In some regions, they took this bioengineering a step further, incorporating animal dung into the mix. While it might seem unappealing, the dung added its own organic fibers and, crucially, water-resistant oils that helped the finished brick shed water more effectively. The exact recipe was a closely guarded local secret, perfected for the specific composition of local clays and sands. A mixture that worked perfectly in the Nile Delta would be a failure in the arid highlands of Persia. This was hyper-local material science, a formula refined over centuries to create the perfect building block for a specific place. Once the walls were raised, the next challenge was to protect them. A bare mud brick wall, while possessing excellent thermal mass, was vulnerable to erosion from wind-driven sand and rain. The solution was a sophisticated array of plasters and renders. They didn't just slap mud on the walls, they created engineered coatings with specific functions. A common choice was gypsum plaster, made by heating the mineral gypsum to drive off its water content, creating a powder called plaster of Paris. When mixed with water, it would recrystallize into a hard, smooth, and incredibly white finish. This brilliant white surface was not just for aesthetics. It acted as a reflective shield, bouncing a significant portion of the sun's radiant heat away from the building, much like the white robes worn by desert dwellers. In areas without gypsum, they used lime plaster, created by burning limestone in a kiln to produce quicklime, which was then slaked with water to form a paste. This lime plaster was slower to set but formed a durable, breathable, and slightly flexible coating that could accommodate the subtle movements of the mud brick walls beneath it without cracking. These plasters were the building's sunscreen and raincoat, a vital protective layer that significantly extended the lifespan of the entire structure. The mastery of stone, however, represents an even more profound level of craft. We marvel at the massive, perfectly fitted blocks of ancient monuments and assume they must have had advanced technology. The truth is, their technology was knowledge, a deep, tactile understanding of geology that was passed from master to apprentice. Quarrying was the first act of this stone symphony. They didn't use dynamite. Instead, they learned to read the natural bedding planes and fracture lines within the rock itself. They would drill a series of wooden wedges into a natural crack, then pour water over them. The wood would swell with tremendous, slow force, patiently and precisely splitting the stone along a perfect line. This method required an intimate familiarity with the stone's grain, its weaknesses and its strengths. It was a conversation with the mountain, persuading it to give up its bounty rather than forcing it. Shaping and setting these multi-ton blocks was the next great challenge. They used harder stones as hammers and chisels, laboriously dressing each block to a surprisingly smooth face, but the real genius was in the joining. The goal was not a glue-like bond, but a perfect mechanical fit. The surfaces were often left slightly concave, so that the edges of the blocks met first. This created a stable, interlocking line of contact that was far more resistant to shifting than two flat surfaces, which could slide past each other. In some of the most advanced masonry, like that of the Incas or the Nabateans, the blocks were shaped with complex, multifaceted joints that locked together like a three-dimensional puzzle. They understood that a wall is a system, and that the stability of each block contributes to the strength of the whole. The final act was often the application of a stone slurry or a fine lime mortar, which was brushed into the hairline gaps. This wasn't for strength, but to create a perfectly smooth, monolithic-looking surface and to keep wind and dust from penetrating the wall. The entire process, from quarry to finished wall, was a testament to empirical science, knowledge gained not in a laboratory, but through countless hours of observation, failure, and refinement. It was a craft that turned the most basic ingredients of the earth into legacies of stone that have endured for millennia. While the desert cities often appear as isolated miracles of ingenuity, they were in fact deeply connected, linked by the same arteries of commerce that carried silks and spices. The legendary Silk Road was far more than a highway for luxury goods. It was a vast, slow-moving internet for the exchange of ideas, a conduit for the most precious cargo of all, the knowledge of survival. As camel caravans snaked through mountain passes and across endless dunes, they carried not only material wealth but also the blueprints for civilization itself. The merchants and travelers were the unwitting librarians and engineers of this intellectual exchange, sharing stories of a clever water system seen in one oasis or an architectural trick observed in a distant caravanserai. This cross-pollination of technology meant that a breakthrough achieved in the heart of Persia could, within a few generations, be saving lives in the deserts of North Africa or the plateaus of Central Asia. The survival of human settlements across the world's arid zones is a testament not to isolated genius, but to a collaborative, global project that unfolded over millennia. The most powerful example of this technological migration is undoubtedly the Qanat system. This revolutionary method of tapping groundwater is widely believed to have first been perfected in the highlands of ancient Persia over 2,500 years ago. The Persians, facing the challenge of supporting agriculture and cities in a largely arid landscape, developed this brilliant solution, but the knowledge did not remain a national secret. As the Persian Empire expanded and its influence radiated outward, the technology traveled with its armies, its administrators, and its traders. Moving west, it was adopted and adapted by the peoples of the Arabian Peninsula, where it became known as the Falaj. From there, it crossed the deserts of North Africa, where it is called the Fagara, enabling the growth of oasis cities that became vital way stations for trans-Saharan caravans. In a remarkable journey, the technology was even carried across the Strait of Gibraltar by the Moors, who constructed sophisticated Qanat systems, known as Viajes de Agua, to support cities in Islamic Spain, including the magnificent capital of Cordoba. This single hydrological invention, born in one specific region, became the foundational technology for urban life across an entire belt of the world's drylands, a direct result of knowledge being treated as a shared resource rather than a guarded commodity. This exchange was not limited to water management. Architectural styles and climate control strategies flowed along these same routes with the fluidity of a desert breeze. The iconic wind tower, or Bajir, so characteristic of Persian architecture in cities like Yazd, did not remain confined to the Iranian plateau. Its principle of passive ventilation was so effective that it spread eastward into the deserts of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and westward across the Arabian Gulf. You can see its clear architectural descendants in the bargeels of the Gulf states and in the wind-catching structures found in the traditional buildings of the Sindh region in Pakistan. While the specific aesthetic form might change from place to place, the number of sides, the decorative elements, the precise internal configuration, the core scientific principle remained the same: to capture high-altitude breezes and funnel them down to cool living spaces. This was not mere cultural imitation. It was the pragmatic adoption of a proven technology. A merchant who had experienced the profound comfort of a Bajir-cooled home in one city would understand its value immediately and could describe its function to a master builder in his own hometown, sparking a process of local innovation and adaptation. The trade routes acted as a living laboratory where the most successful environmental adaptations were tested, refined, and propagated across continents. This free flow of survival technology reveals a profound truth about these ancient societies. While they competed for political power and control of trade, they operated within a shared ecological niche that demanded cooperation at a more fundamental level. The challenges of the desert were a universal enemy, and the solutions were a universal good. A new design for a more efficient water-lifting device, like the Sakia or Noria, developed in one region, could increase agricultural output for everyone along the route. An improved method for crafting waterproof plaster for cisterns was a benefit to any settlement facing water scarcity. This created a powerful incentive for the exchange of knowledge. The wealth generated from trading silks and gems was fleeting, but the wealth generated from a reliable water supply or a comfortable, cool home was perpetual. The greatest treasure a caravan could carry was not a chest of gold, but a new idea that could transform a struggling outpost into a thriving, self-sustaining city. This demonstrates that the most valuable resource these civilizations possessed was not material but intellectual. It was the accumulated, shared wisdom of how to live and live well within the demanding embrace of the desert. Their legacy teaches us that in the face of universal challenges, openness and the free exchange of knowledge are not just noble ideals, they are the very engines of resilience and long-term prosperity. The desert does more than just shape buildings and cities. It forges a specific kind of human spirit, a psychological landscape as distinct and rugged as the physical one. Imagine the daily reality of living in such a place. The sun is not just hot, it is a constant, demanding presence. The wind is not just a breeze, it is a force that can erase your path or supply a life-saving breath of cooler air. The silence is not merely quiet, it is a vast, enveloping emptiness. In this crucible of extremes, the human mind is tempered, developing a resilience that is as much about inner fortitude as it is about outer survival. This was not a resilience born of brief hardship, but one cultivated over a lifetime and across generations of facing down the impossible every single day. This environment demanded a radical shift in how one perceives time. In our modern, connected world, we operate on short cycles: daily news, quarterly reports, instant notifications. But in the desert, survival was a long game. Planting a date palm was an act of faith that would not be rewarded for a decade. Excavating a Qanat was a project that a grandfather would start for his grandchildren to finish. This forced a perspective that was inherently patient and persevering. There was no room for impulsivity. A rash decision to travel without enough water, to neglect the maintenance of a cistern, or to overgraze a fragile pasture could have irreversible, fatal consequences. This cultivated a deep, deliberate thoughtfulness. Every action was weighed against its long-term impact, fostering a mindset that valued foresight and careful stewardship over quick, fleeting gains. The desert taught that true strength lies not in speed, but in the unwavering commitment to a goal that may be years or even generations away from fruition. Within this vastness, the human psyche navigated a profound duality. On one hand, the sheer scale of the empty landscape, the endless horizons of sand and rock under an infinite canopy of stars, could induce a crushing sense of loneliness and insignificance. An individual was a tiny, transient speck in a timeless, indifferent expanse. Yet, this very same perspective could also be the source of an unparalleled spiritual connection. Stripped of the distractions of a crowded, noisy world, the mind was free to contemplate the cosmos. The brilliant clarity of the desert night sky, undimmed by artificial light, made the universe feel intimately close. This fostered a worldview where the divine was not confined to a temple, but was present in the wind, the sun, and the silent, enduring stone. Many of the world's great monotheistic religions have their roots in desert cultures, where the stark simplicity of the environment mirrored a belief in a single, unifying power. The desert, therefore, was not a spiritual void, but a sacred space that amplified both the terror of isolation and the awe of connection to something far greater than oneself. Out of this challenging reality emerged two of the most defining and beautiful cultural traits of desert societies: an unparalleled code of hospitality and a rich, vibrant tradition of storytelling. In an environment where a lone traveler found wandering without water was moments from death, the act of offering shelter and sustenance was not merely good manners. It was a fundamental, non-negotiable law of survival. The stranger at your door was not a threat, but a potential link in a chain of mutual aid that stretched across the wilderness. You helped them today, trusting that someone, somewhere, would help you or your kin tomorrow. This created a powerful social contract built on radical generosity. The sharing of water, dates, and bread was a ritual that affirmed life itself. It was a practical acknowledgement that in the face of the desert's immense power, all people were equally vulnerable, and their only true security lay in their shared humanity. Storytelling was the other vital thread in this social fabric. In a world without written records for most, the spoken word was the living library of the people. Elders were not just respected for their age, they were revered as the custodians of essential knowledge. Around a fire, under a blanket of stars, stories were told that did far more than entertain. They were the vessels of survival. A tale might contain the hidden location of a forgotten well, describe the signs of an approaching sandstorm, or explain the intricate process of maintaining a Qanat. Woven into these narratives were the history of the tribe, its heroes, its failures, and its laws. This oral tradition ensured that critical information was memorized, repeated, and passed down through the generations in a form that was engaging and unforgettable. The storyteller was both historian and teacher, using the power of narrative to bind the community together with a shared identity and a common purpose, ensuring that the hard-won wisdom of the past was never lost to the silence of the sands. The desert mind that emerged from this crucible was one uniquely tempered by adversity. It found a profound richness in simplicity, valuing water over gold, shade over finery, and a trustworthy companion over vast wealth. It discovered its greatest strength not in individual prowess, but in the unbreakable bonds of community. This is a mindset that feels increasingly relevant, even urgent, in our complex, hyper-connected, and often alienating modern world. We are surrounded by noise, yet we can feel profoundly isolated. We have access to limitless information, yet we often lack the deep, patient wisdom that comes from long-term perspective. We champion individualism, yet we yearn for genuine community. The legacy of the desert dwellers is a powerful reminder that resilience is not just about having robust technology or sturdy buildings. It is about cultivating a robust inner landscape. It is about learning patience in an age of impatience, finding meaning in simplicity amidst overwhelming complexity, and rediscovering the irreplaceable strength that comes from looking out for one another, understanding that our survival, our comfort, and our very humanity are, and always have been, a collective endeavor. Now, let's journey across the world to the high desert plateaus of the American Southwest, where a remarkable story of adaptation unfolds on the sheer cliff faces of what is now Mesa Verde National Park. Here, the ancestral Pueblones, sometimes known as the Anasazi, performed their own version of the desert miracle, not by carving into rose-red sandstone like the Nabateans, but by building entire villages of stone and mortar tucked deep beneath the towering rims of canyons. Imagine standing on the dusty mesa top where the sun beats down relentlessly and the wind scours the landscape. Then you peer over the edge and there it is, an intricate city of multi-story structures, seemingly glued to the side of a colossal cliff, sheltered in a massive, arched alcove. This was not a retreat born of fear, but a brilliant, calculated choice to use the land's own architecture as their primary defense and climate moderator. These alcoves, carved over millennia by water seeping through the porous sandstone, were nature's gift. They provided a monumental, permanent overhang that acted as a giant roof, shielding the dwellings from the worst of the sun's summer intensity, deflecting torrential rain, and blocking the full force of punishing winds. It was a ready-made shelter, and the ancestral Pueblones, with astonishing skill, built their world within its protective embrace. Life in these cliff dwellings was a masterful balancing act between the world above and the world below. While their homes were nestled in the cool shade of the cliffs, their survival depended on the sun-drenched mesas high above. The ancestral Pueblones were masters of dry farming, a form of agriculture that seems almost like magic in such an arid place. They didn't have rivers to divert. They had to coax life from the sporadic rains and the winter snowmelt. On the flat tops of the mesas, they cultivated the Three Sisters corn, beans, and squash, a legendary trio of companion plants. The tall cornstalks provided a structure for the bean vines to climb. The beans, in turn, fixed nitrogen in the soil to fertilize the corn, and the broad leaves of the squash plants spread across the ground, creating a living mulch that shaded the soil, suppressed weeds, and conserved precious moisture. Their fields were not just planted anywhere. They were strategically located in areas where runoff from the mesa tops would naturally collect, and they often employed check dams and terraces built from loose stone to slow down rainfall, preventing erosion and giving every drop of water time to soak deep into the ground around the roots of their crops. This was agriculture by patience and observation, a deep understanding of how water moves across a landscape, but their ingenuity didn't stop at the field's edge. They understood that water was too valuable to leave to chance. Up on the mesas, they constructed sophisticated reservoirs, carefully lined and positioned to capture and store the melting snow and the precious downpours from summer monsoons. They carved deep pits known as Aquifers into the ground, which, while primarily ceremonial in purpose, also had a practical side, sometimes functioning as cool, subterranean storage for their harvest. And then there was the ingenious system of getting water down to the cliff dwellings themselves. While evidence is subtle, it's believed they used sealed baskets and pottery to transport water from seeps and springs along the canyon walls, and they may have even channeled water from the mesa tops through simple rock alignments. This holistic system, farming the high desert, capturing its water, and living in its sheltered cliffs, created a self-sustaining loop, a vertical economy of survival that connected the productive mesa top with the protected cliffside home. The architectural placement of the cliff dwellings themselves reveals a sophisticated understanding of solar geometry that rivals the passive solar principles we saw in the Middle East and North Africa. The builders of Mesa Verde were, in effect, solar architects. They positioned their dwellings to achieve a perfect thermal balance across the seasons. The deep alcoves provided perpetual shade during the scorching summer months, creating a cool refuge. But in the winter, when the sun rides lower in the southern sky, its rays could penetrate deep into the alcoves, bathing the stone walls in welcome warmth. This natural solar gain would have taken the bitter edge off the high desert winter, reducing the need for firewood, which was itself a scarce resource. The stone they used for their walls, the very sandstone of the cliff itself, acted as a superb thermal mass, absorbing the winter sun's heat during the day and slowly releasing it through the cold nights, just as the thick walls of a Moroccan Kasbah would do. Furthermore, the layout of the villages within the alcoves often created sheltered plazas and courtyards, protected from the wind, where daily life and community could flourish. They even designed their structures to promote ventilation, with doorways and room placements that would allow cooler air to circulate, drawing out stale air and maintaining a fresh environment within the compact village. The story of Mesa Verde is a powerful testament to a universal truth. Separated by vast oceans and completely different cultures from the builders of Petra, Yazd, or the Moroccan Kasbahs, the ancestral Puebloans arrived at startlingly similar solutions to the same fundamental problems. They all looked at the sun and saw a source of heat to be managed through orientation and mass. They all looked at the wind and sought to find shelter or channel its power. They all looked at the stone and earth and saw not just a building material, but a thermal battery and a protective shield. This independent convergence of ideas is one of the most compelling aspects of human history. It suggests that when faced with the relentless, non-negotiable logic of a desert environment, the human mind, in its drive to survive and thrive, will often follow a similar path of innovation. The cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde are not an isolated anomaly. They are a brilliant chapter in a global story of resilience, proving that the principles of harnessing wind, stone, and sun are a fundamental and universal human response, a shared language of survival whispered on the desert wind and carved into the stone of every continent. Yet today, a strange paradox defines many modern desert cities. In places like Phoenix and Dubai, the shimmering heat outside is held at bay by a constant, energy-intensive battle. The hum of air conditioning is the unceasing soundtrack of urban life, a technological roar that allows glass towers to rise from the sand. Where ancient civilizations built wind towers to invite cool breezes, we construct sealed buildings that require massive heat pumps to expel the warmth. Where the Nabateans carved intricate cisterns to capture every drop of rain, we build colossal desalination plants that burn fossil fuels to turn seawater into freshwater, a process as brilliant as it is thirsty for energy. And where the Pomeranz designed shaded colonnades for public life, we pave vast expanses with asphalt and concrete, creating urban heat islands that intensify the very problem we are trying to solve. This modern approach provides undeniable comfort and has enabled populations to boom in regions once considered marginal. But this comfort comes at a steep and escalating cost, creating a system that is often profoundly unsustainable, consuming staggering amounts of electricity and water in a delicate environment where both are inherently scarce. This reliance on active, energy-guzzling technology represents a fundamental philosophical departure from the passive, integrated wisdom of the past. Ancient builders saw themselves as partners within an ecosystem, carefully aligning their structures with the sun's path and the wind's direction. Their solutions were baked into the very form of the city, requiring no external power source once completed. A Qanat flows for centuries on gravity alone. A wind tower functions as long as the wind blows. A thick mud brick wall regulates temperature simply by existing. Our contemporary model, by contrast, is based on a philosophy of dominance and separation. We seek to create a sealed, artificial interior environment that is entirely independent of the hostile exterior, and we power this separation with a constant flow of electricity, often generated by burning the very fossil fuels that contribute to the climate crisis. This creates a dangerous vulnerability. When the power fails in a modern desert metropolis during a heat wave, it isn't just an inconvenience, it can swiftly become a life-threatening emergency. The ancient city, with its passive cooling and natural ventilation, would remain habitable. Our technological fortresses, for all their sophistication, can become traps when the grid goes down. The challenge these ancient ruins pose to us, then, is not to abandon our technology and return to a romanticized past. That is neither feasible nor desirable. The goal is a thoughtful and creative synthesis, Imagine a new kind of desert architecture, one that uses modern materials and computational design not to overpower nature, but to collaborate with it more intelligently than ever before. We can construct buildings with high-tech phase change materials that mimic the thermal mass of ancient stone, but with far greater efficiency. We can use sophisticated solar modeling software to precisely angle louvers and shades, achieving a level of solar control that ancient builders could only approximate through generations of trial and error. We can integrate solar panels directly into roofs and facades, using the relentless desert sun to power the minimal, efficient mechanical systems we still need, creating a self-sustaining loop. This isn't about choosing between the past and the future. It's about weaving the deep, timeless logic of passive survival with the precision and power of our modern tools. This synthesis must extend to our most critical resource, water. The ancient practice of capturing and cherishing every drop is more relevant than ever. Modern cities can embrace this by moving beyond the take, use, dispose model. We can design neighborhoods with permeable pavements that allow rainwater to recharge aquifers instead of racing into storm drains. We can mandate grey-water systems that recycle water from showers and sinks for irrigation and toilet flushing, drastically reducing the demand on municipal supplies. Rooftops can be designed as catchment areas, channeling precious rainfall into storage tanks, just as the Nabateans did, but with modern filters and pumps for distribution. On a larger scale, this means rethinking our landscaping, shifting from thirsty, non-native grass lawns to xeriscaping with beautiful, drought-resistant native plants that are adapted to the local climate. This approach transforms the city from a linear consumer of resources into a circular, regenerative system, much like the self-sustaining oases of the past. Ultimately, the shift required is as much cultural as it is technological. The ancient desert cultures fostered a mindset of conservation and community out of sheer necessity. Their survival depended on a shared commitment to maintaining the Qanat, to fair water distribution, and to collective responsibility. Our modern challenge is to rediscover that ethos voluntarily before necessity forces our hand. This means re-evaluating our relationship with comfort itself. Is true comfort a constant, artificially maintained 70 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of the season? Or is it a well-designed space that connects us to the natural rhythms of day and night, summer and winter, allowing our bodies to adapt gently? It means valuing resilience over sheer convenience, building communities where neighbors know each other and share resources, and where the design of our public spaces encourages walking under shaded pathways rather than driving from one air-conditioned box to another. The ancient cities teach us that the most profound form of security is not a fortress against nature, but a home that is gracefully and intelligently adapted to it. In an era of accelerating climate change, their legacy offers a powerful blueprint not for retreat, but for a wiser, more resilient, and ultimately more harmonious way of living in the beautiful but demanding landscapes of the world's arid regions. So how do we bridge the gap from admiring these magnificent ruins to truly understanding the lives of the people who built them? The answers lie not in grand assumptions, but in the meticulous, grain-by-grain work of archaeology. This is a discipline of patience where the story of an entire civilization is slowly, carefully reassembled from the fragments it left behind. Imagine an archaeologist on their hands and knees, not searching for treasure chests, but carefully troweling through layers of compacted earth and ancient refuse. They are reading a book where the pages are made of soil, and each layer or stratum represents a different chapter in time. By analyzing these soil layers, scientists can decipher the ancient climate. A layer rich in pollen from drought-resistant plants tells a story of aridity, while a sudden band of sediment might indicate a catastrophic flash flood that swept through the city. They can even find microscopic particles of charcoal that speak of ancient fires, whether for cooking, industry, or perhaps even conflict. This environmental detective work provides the crucial backdrop, the setting for the human drama that unfolded. The most vital clues to survival are often found in the most mundane places. The study of archaeobotany and zooarchaeology, the analysis of ancient plant and animal remains allows us to reconstruct the ancient diet and agricultural practices with astonishing detail. A handful of charred seeds found in a hearth can tell us what crops they cultivated. The bones of animals found in a trash midden reveal not only what they ate, but how they managed their herds. Were they primarily herding goats, which can survive on sparse vegetation, or did they have cattle, which require more water and richer pasture? The presence of fish bones in a desert city hundreds of miles from the coast would be a bombshell discovery, pointing to extensive trade networks. Even the microscopic phytoliths, the durable silica skeletons of plants, clinging to a stone grinding tool, can confirm that a specific type of grain was processed there. This biological evidence paints a vivid picture of the ancient food web, showing us how these cultures transformed the limited offerings of the desert into a stable and diverse diet, the very fuel that powered their civilization. Of course, the grandest testaments to their ingenuity are the hydrological systems themselves. Mapping the remains of a Qanat or a network of cisterns is a complex puzzle. Archaeologists will slowly trace the line of collapsed vertical shafts across the desert surface, which from the air can look like a line of anthills marching toward the horizon. By excavating key points along this line, they can understand the tunnel's depth, its construction method, and even take samples from the mineral deposits on its walls, which can be analyzed to understand the historical water quality and flow rate. Uncovering a massive reservoir like those at Petra or Palmyra involves not just clearing the sand, but also studying the engineering of its walls and the plaster that made it watertight. They look for the inlet and outlet channels, piecing together the entire system from catchment to distribution. It is through this painstaking work that we can truly appreciate the scale of the ambition, realizing that a city's entire water supply depended on a hand-dug tunnel stretching for dozens of miles, a project of almost unimaginable perseverance. In recent decades, the archaeologist's toolkit has been revolutionized by technologies that allow them to see the invisible. Light detection and ranging, or LiDAR, is like giving the landscape an X-ray. Mounted on an airplane or drone, a LiDAR unit fires millions of laser pulses at the ground. By measuring how long it takes for each pulse to return, it can create a fantastically detailed, three-dimensional map of the surface, digitally stripping away vegetation to reveal features hidden for centuries beneath forest canopies or shifting sands. This technology has rediscovered entire lost cities in Mesoamerica and has been used to map the full extent of ancient water management systems in the deserts of the Middle East, revealing canals and field systems that are completely invisible from the ground. Similarly, ground-penetrating radar sends radio waves into the earth, which bounce back when they hit something of a different density, like a buried wall or a void. This allows archaeologists to peer beneath the sand without ever lifting a trowel, identifying promising locations for excavation and preserving the integrity of fragile sites by minimizing unnecessary digging. Yet for all the high-tech assistance, the most intimate connection to the past often comes from the smallest, most personal finds. A broken pottery shard, its curve fitting back together with others to form a storage jar, tells a story of daily life and food preservation. The soot staining its outside indicates it sat over a fire for cooking. A child's toy carved from a piece of wood, or a simple cosmetic implement made of bone, reminds us that these were people with the same human needs for comfort, play, and beauty that we have today. And then there are the carved inscriptions. When a linguist deciphers a line of text on a tomb or a public monument, it's like hearing a voice from the past speak directly to us. These aren't just names and dates. They can be laws governing water rights, accounts of trade, or dedications to gods, providing direct insight into their social structure, their economy, and their beliefs. Each of these artifacts, from the grandest inscription to the most humble seed, is a single piece of a massive, interconnected puzzle. It is through the patient accumulation of these countless fragments that the fog of time slowly clears, revealing the incremental innovations, the daily routines, and the collective spirit that allowed these civilizations to not only survive a hostile world, but to flourish within it, creating legacies of art and architecture that continue to captivate and inspire us millennia later. As our journey through these impossible cities draws to a close, we are left with more than just memories of magnificent ruins. We carry with us a profound admiration for the human spirit's boundless capacity to innovate and adapt. What began as a simple question, how could such places exist, has unfolded into a masterclass in resilience, revealing that the true miracle was not the city itself, but the mindset of its people. Their mastery of wind, stone, and sun transcends mere technical achievement. It represents a philosophical revolution, a fundamental shift from seeing the natural world as an adversary to be conquered to recognizing it as a partner in a grand, symbiotic dance. They listened to the whispers of the desert and responded with elegant, integrated solutions, building not in spite of their environment, but because of it, using its very challenges as the raw materials for their civilization. The ultimate legacy of these desert metropolises is a powerful reminder that our greatest resources have never been gold or oil, but something far more profound and accessible: human intelligence, unwavering cooperation, and a deep-seated respect for the world that sustains us. The intricate Qanat was not just a tunnel, it was a testament to communal patience and long-term thinking. The wind tower was not just an architectural feature, it was a symbol of working with invisible forces rather than against them. The thick stone walls were not just shelter, they were a lesson in using the Earth's own stability to find our own. These civilizations understood that survival was a collective endeavor, that a society thrives when it fairly shares its scarcest resources and when every member feels responsible for maintaining the systems that give life. This ancient social contract, forged in the crucible of scarcity, is perhaps their most urgent lesson for our modern world of abundance and isolation. What these ancient builders left behind is far more than a collection of archaeological wonders. It is a living blueprint for a sustainable future. In an era defined by climate change and resource anxiety, their wisdom speaks directly to our most pressing challenges. They demonstrate that resilience is not about building higher walls or more powerful machines, but about designing systems that are inherently flexible, efficient, and deeply integrated with local conditions. Their solutions were low energy, low waste, and built to last for centuries, not just decades. They prove that the most advanced technology is sometimes the one that requires no electricity, the one that harnesses gravity, convection, and evaporation, the fundamental forces that have always been available to us. Looking to the past is not an act of nostalgia, but a source of brilliant, time-tested inspiration. The answers to a sustainable future may not lie in a distant, speculative technology, but in the timeless intelligence etched into the stone of Petra, whispered by the wind towers of Yazd, and flowing through the hidden Qanats beneath the sand. So let the story of these impossible cities change how you see the world and our place within it. Let it inspire a new kind of vision, one that looks at a harsh landscape and sees not limitation but potential. Let it encourage a deeper appreciation for the simple, elegant logic of working with nature's grain. And perhaps most importantly, let it remind us that human ingenuity, when guided by cooperation and respect, is capable of performing miracles. We would be incredibly grateful if you shared your own reflections on these timeless lessons in the comments below. What aspect of their ingenuity resonated most deeply with you? Your thoughts help continue this vital conversation, ensuring that the wisdom of the past continues to inform the choices we make for